Jim. Yeah, and thank you to the SCAA team that's been working with our board as well through this process. It's been certainly a unique situation. Okay, any other communication items? Then we'll have our legislative update, Lori and Dave.
I don't have anything new since our last meeting. There's been no communication from PSBA to me.
Okay.
Dave might know something.
I don't have anything.
Okay.
Amber, can I share one thing there?
Sure.
We're waiting to hear back from our state legislators on the status of some of the components of your resolution relating to charter schools, in particular, cyber charter schools, and has anything changed from what practice was put in place when the schools were closed by the state. So we don't have that at this time, and we're waiting on our local legislators who represent us at the state level to get us back. Another staff is working on it from our conversations with them today.
Good to know. Thank you. Okay. Gretchen, is there a report from the Council of Governments?
Yeah, just 3 brief items. The status of COG operations during the COVID-19 green phase and what the green phase means, what they're doing. And basically they're still practicing staggering shifts, limiting gatherings in common areas or meetings, wearing masks in common areas, wearing masks before entering the buildings, maintaining 6-foot physical distancing, sanitizing measures are continuing, and they're having regular breaks for hand washing. So, and curbside and delivery methods are preferable to people meeting together in person. Still practicing all of those criteria that they had during the yellow phase. And then number 2, Center Parks and Rec, the pools opened on June 27th. Summer camps are targeted to start on July 6th. And the pavilion and sports field rentals have begun, and that was starting on June 22nd. So going back to a little bit more activity there. And then the third item is that I think you all remember back when the pandemic started, there was an executive committee formed to take over the regular voting that normally the general forum would do unless it was a unanimous vote that was required. And that expired. And so they last Monday voted to continue that, extend that through to August 18th. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Any other communication items then? Okay, then we have time on the agenda now for public comment. If anyone who is here would like to make a public comment, you'll have a function to raise your hand electronically. Okay, I see Haley Brandstetter has a hand raised. If you could then again just state your name, where you are from within the district, and each individual is limited to comments of up to 3 minutes for items on the agenda or related to board business. So if you'd like to go ahead, thank you. Oh, I'm not quite able to hear you.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Sorry. I am a student at State High, and looking at the agenda, I see that revision. So I actually
I can't hear the person.
I can't. Yeah, I didn't. It's fading in and out. Haley, would you be able to get closer to your microphone, maybe?
I'm sorry about that. Let me know when you can hear me better.
Yeah.
Is it any better?
Not really.
Okay. I'm not sure. Sorry.
Is her sound turned up? Like,
is your sound turned up on your machine?
Is it her microphone input? Like if she goes to her microphone settings?
Hmm. Nick, I don't know if you have any troubleshooting advice.
Is that better?
That is better. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. It was a settings problem.
Oh, no worries. Thank you.
So, sorry about that. Anyways, my name is Haley Brandstetter. I am a student at State High, and looking at the agenda, I saw, well, I knew this beforehand, but the social studies curriculum is under review, or revision, sorry. And I wanted to bring up, I made a survey about, to get student input about the current social studies curriculum all throughout SCAS, and I'd love to share these results with you if I could. Obviously, I can't do that right now because there's not enough time. I could always email it to the All Board email address, but there were a few things that me and a few other people talked about mentioning to possibly consider adding to the curriculum. And I know that there's certain academic standards that need to be followed, but I do think inclusivity is very important, especially in history.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thanks.
Haley, thank you for your comment. Would you, if you would like to email us with anything else you have, and if there's any other part of if there's anything you feel like would sum up the information that you got from the survey, you could feel free to share that with us as well. So.
Okay. I mean, just as an overall kind of thing, a lot of people didn't think the current curriculum is like inclusive to many different types of communities, especially the Black community and the LGBT community, because so far there hasn't been much history regarding the LGBT community, and I understand that that's sometimes a difficult thing to talk about in schools because it's considered, a not touchy topic, but sometimes students don't necessarily understand it, I suppose. But yeah, I do think it would be valuable to show you guys these results and everything that I got, so you can see some of what student and SCAS alum have to say.
That's great. Thank you. If you could email that to us, it's all-board@scasd.org. That would be much appreciated. And thanks for getting students engaged on this issue as well. Okay, thank you. I see another hand raise. Rick Bhattacharya.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. If you could just state for us again your name and where you reside in the district, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Rick Bhattacharya. I am actually also a State High student, and I am a rising junior, and I reside in Ferguson Township. So I was also just wanting to give a sort of comment on the social studies curriculum. So I think as a student, a lot of what we're learning right now, I go forward with Haley's comments that yes, we really need to increase our grasp of what we are learning about, especially when it comes to other people, other cultures, other things that a lot of the times doesn't come up in normal history. So I just kind of applaud one of the steps that was taken. That was changing part of the 9th grade curriculum to geography. I think geography is something that's really important to learn in schools. And as a freshman, I took AP Human Geography, but I think one thing that wasn't available to all students was like a normal geography class that should be taken. And so I would like to applaud that came up, because I think geography is something that is really a fundamental to being able to understand other people, other cultures, and just like get a more diverse community. So I just wanted to applaud that and let the school board know about that.
Thank you. Okay, would anyone else like to make a public comment who's tuned in the meeting? All right, not seeing any other hands raised. Then we'll move on to routine approvals. So at this time, I'd like a motion to approve the routine approval listing as presented on the agenda.
Leah, so moved.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Are there questions or discussion regarding any of the routine approval items? Okay. Then seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
I think Laurel has.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking on the electronic ones. There we go.
Sorry, it took me a while to get back to there. I just had a quick question about the OPP contracts. And I'm trying to bring the item up now, but it regarded the elementary schools and the temperature maintenance, the annual maintenance for them.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if we anticipate that being every year, or I noticed it said training. Is it more this year because these are new systems, or are we expecting that will be the maintenance every year?
That will be the roughly the maintenance every year. I don't have a good solid number for next year, but it will not drop. It will not drop significantly. Unfortunately, the service contracts for these temperature control systems are relatively expensive.
Yeah.
We have several different vendors in this area, and they are all in this price range, unfortunately. I have been trying to find ways to reduce that cost, and will continue to do so, but this is one of the unfortunate large expenditures with modern systems.
Does that system also cover humidity in the building, or is it just temperature?
There is ability to reduce high humidity, and it's not a function. This is for the automatic temperature control system, which is basically the not the mechanical equipment itself, but the computer programming and sensors and digital pieces that monitor and run that equipment. Our equipment that we chose to do with our projects can dehumidify, and this system would control that. There is no capability within the current systems to add humidity.
Okay. I'm just asking because some of the COVID things deal with humidity. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Then we'll have a roll call vote on the routine approval items.
Ms. Zidney,
Yes.
Dr. Vader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Dr. Buzard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Okay. With that item is passed, and moving on to action items. Item A is a motion to approve the 2020-2021 final budget. This is shown in attachment 6A.
Bedell.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Are there questions or discussion on the adoption of the final budget? I don't see any hands. Okay, so we will have a roll call vote.
Dr. Vader,
Yes. Sorry.
That's okay. Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item B is a motion to approve the annual real estate tax installment payment resolution. This is shown in attachment 6B.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Is there any questions or discussion on this item? Jim?
Yeah, I just had a question about this. This is the one that could be modified by the by legislation, various pieces of legislation. Maybe that's a question for Randy.
Yes, it was. This would have been modified by proposed legislation. Excuse me. Why that's doing. We are not aware of whether that of any recent changes, and the now that we're approaching July 1, I would expect that those changes would not occur.
Good, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. All right, any public comment on this item? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote then.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Okay, that item is passed. Item C is a motion to approve the resolution for the district's 403B plan document shown in attachment 6C.
So moved, Duffy.
Leah's second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Okay. All right, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell.
Yes.
Okay, that item is passed. The next item, item D, is a motion to approve the Comcast WAN contract amendment. This is shown in attachment 6D.
Leah so moved.
Lazard second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Okay, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
That item is passed. The next item, item E, is a motion to approve the proposed new textbooks for the 2020-2021 school year. And this is shown in attachment 6E.
Duffy, so moved.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Sidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes. So that item has passed. Item F is a motion to extend the contract for the development officer as shown in attachment 6F.
Lazard so moved.
Leah's second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Laurel?
Yeah, so we have a recommendation to extend the contract, but to keep the baselines, what they've been in the past contract. Is that correct?
Recommendation is to keep the baselines the same as they were for the 2019-2020 fiscal year, which was based upon the prior year, 2018-2019. Yes, that is correct.
Well, I think the number of donors makes sense because we had an extraordinary outpouring of generosity from a lot of people in the community. So I would expect that that number might go down, and I understand the reason for that. But beyond that, it seems to me that even though we didn't have the major fundraiser of the Maroon and Gray dinner, we sort of replaced that with the COVID help income. So I would feel more comfortable if those baselines actually did reflect this past year's income, and both the annual income as well as the income with major gifts and all, which is the total received.
All right.
No, if there were.
Oh, pardon. Was that it, Laurel?
Well, I also wanted to check something else. So I didn't know if anyone wanted to comment on that.
Okay. Anybody want to chime in on that question? Okay, Laurel, what was the other?
So the other thing is, I just want to make sure that I understand and we all understand, if based on the contract as it's written now, if the income that is generated in this coming year is about what it has been, what it was in 2018-19, it looks to me like the provision that the net receipts have to be a minimum of 80% of the contributions would not have been met. And I want to be I want everyone to understand what we're talking about. It looks to me that what we're saying, and I'd like Randy's confirmation on this, is that as long as we bring in this coming year, $300,000 in foundation income, assuming all the bonuses are earned, our net income will be $240,000, which is 80%, which is fine. Is that correct?
I'm going to have to pull some documents out. I'm not sure that I can respond that quickly.
I think that's sort of how it was written, was assuming that, given that it says projected to be 300,000.
My understanding was, Randy, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there was, with this contract, because we had a unique situation this year, that was part of the reason why the contract for this next just 1 year extension is written in the way that it is.
That was my intent. That is correct. So may I ask, you're referencing the paragraph right before section 3?
Yes.
And can you restate your comment again, please?
The contractor fees are estimated, the income is projected to be roughly 300,000 for this coming year, based on what's written there. As long as Paul makes his base, the contractor makes his base income, which would be $60,000, then the net result would be 80%, as indicated in the third sentence there. However, so that basically is it. As long as that happens, we're fine. Is that correct, that we're saying we expect to raise a minimum of $300,000 in this coming year?
That's what we're estimating, yes, based upon our previous history.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. Any questions or discussion from anyone else?
Excuse me, but Laurel, what you're saying is that you're assuming that the guarantee is going to be 300,000. That's not what it says. That simply says there's a projection. The guarantee is the net percentage that the district will get from whatever is collected.
Right, and I was figuring that if he gets the base fee, which is $60,000 in fees, subtract that from the 300,
Okay,
get 240,000, that's 80%.
right.
However, if he earns a bonus and therefore gets more than the 60,000, it falls below that.
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, that's what I was trying to clarify. And I did have one other comment before we vote.
Okay. Did anybody have anything else in response to this particular question? Okay, go ahead, Laurel.
Just that another provision of the contract is that the invoices contain sufficient detail to be able to see what was done. And I think that's important because development work really depends on past work. And so the goal of that provision in the contract, I think, is just to make sure the district and the foundation have documentation. I've asked to see those invoices and basically was told I couldn't. I'll be submitting a right to know request for them, but I wish I had seen them just to confirm them, that part of the contract was met. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other comments?
Yeah, I don't know that the comment that I was included in said that you were not permitted to see them. I think it was a timely, it was a matter of timing from when the request originated to being able to have them for this meeting. At least that's how I interpreted the response.
Okay, I'm sorry. I sent in the request within a day of finding out it would be on the agenda, which was last Wednesday or so.
Ms. Concepcion, can I respond, please?
Absolutely.
I am not aware that a board member receives copies of any other invoices that are paid in the district. My response also included, I believe, a statement that said that I would ask for entire board direction upon providing the copies of the invoices requested. I don't have a problem providing them to the full board or to all board members. But because we do not have a practice of reviewing invoices at the board table or with board members, I felt that the entire board should weigh in on that request from a single board member. And I believe that was stated in my response. And if it was not, I apologize.
Sorry, that is what I understood.
Okay. Dan, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to second, so to speak, Laurel's question about invoices. Not that we necessarily need to see them, but it'd be nice to see some documentation of what has been received and how it really demonstrates the work of this contractor. This individual is a contract, not an employee of the school district. He's retained under at this point, an annual contract. We've been asking for this for years. This isn't like something we thought of last week. And it never occurred to me until Laurel brought it up. But I think really in good faith, there should be some reassurance to the board that these documents have been provided that indicates on an every 2-week basis or monthly basis. And that's just the way in which contractors deliver their services and substantiate their work. So I would agree that we need to have, without necessarily seeing every single document, I think it'd be great to be able to see some track record of what's turned in and when, and just to reassure us that this person is gathering and providing the information that one would expect for someone in that position. Thank you.
Okay. Gretchen, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to ditto what Laurel and Dan had just said, and to add that I had actually communicated with Laurel saying that if she files that right to know, would she be willing to share it with me? Because I was also interested in seeing the invoices. So I just thought I'd add that to the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Lori?
Yes, I agree too. I think that it's relevant to the status of review of a contract and to you know, this is taxpayer money. So I think it's fair for us to be able to look at that. So thank you. I support it.
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, just to be clear, you know, based on, I'm not sure exactly what people are expecting to see, but the contract, and Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the language in paragraph 2 is identical to the language in the prior contracts regarding.
Yes, it is.
So, you know, the invoices, you know, shall contain sufficient detail to clearly identify the services performed. So if Paul submits an invoice, that one line that says, you know, services for managing the development office of the district, he has clearly identified the services he performed. If people are expecting to see tasks that Paul performed to complete those services, that is, I don't know that that is or is not what he is providing, but that is not what is spelled out in the contract. It's the services performed. It's not what was done to accomplish those services. So I'm just raising that because depending on what people are expecting to see, we need to be consistent with the contract language and expectation, for that.
For the record, the invoices are reviewed in my office before they are paid. They are much more reflective than based upon feedback that the board has provided in the past, and they are given the same consideration or more than a variety of invoices that we receive from various contractors in similar situations.
Right, Lori?
Sorry, just one last comment, and that is that we had talked about this at length in previous meetings when this has come up. And one of the things that we also talked about was the fact that any development person is given a sort of a system of metrics by which they're expected to achieve, including, you know, number of visits to potential donors per month. And so while that may not be in the contract, I think that we should have some expectation for the money that we're paying monthly, that there are certain measures being met. And so just adding that is a recycling of a conversation that we had in the past.
Dr. O'Donnell?
Thanks. I was just going to say, I think to help Randy and me as we interact with Paul, and I mean, our development effort has been incredibly successful. The metrics and the dollars raised are the facts. If we weren't successful with our initiatives of raising money, I think that would raise concerns. I think to help us so that if we're going to go down a road of reporting invoices on all contractors or any contractors, I think if we're going to cross over that with the role of the board to manage monthly tasks and what people are doing and not doing, I think that wasn't what we had initially discussed about with what our goals were with raising funds to impact student experiences. So I think I would prefer if you had it in your expectations for our annual report so that we can show you, because I think that, you know, that should drive whether or not you support a contract or not. Or, you know, is that contract meeting, is it benefiting kids in the district? And I think with what has been happening with fundraising, that's clear. We've come a long way, not that we can't get better, but I think to help us be strategic, I think putting those clear expectations on what you want when we reflect on it, to get into discussions about individual invoices, I don't think would be a good use of the board's time. Obviously, people can get what they want, and you can ask for the information and get it. But I think to be strategic as a board and impact student experiences, I think looking at what do you expect as a board so that we can be successful and get better at impacting kids. Thanks.
Okay, Scott, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, just a minor addition to what Lori had said. You're right that there's been an abundance of conversation relative to metrics around development and things like that. And I believe that when the last contract was initiated, the consideration of the additional compensation payments were intended to provide some level of, I'll just say, I think, clarity relative to the metrics that were thought to be the most important without actually listing metrics and appearing to be watching over somebody's shoulder relative to their performance. That basically, if A, B, and C under the additional compensation payments were achieved, then that would inherently include number of touches, key metrics that a development officer might be, might need to do to be successful. So I know that was a large conversation, and I'm pretty sure it was boiled down, or an attempt was made to boil that down into the 3 bullets related to the additional compensation payments.
Okay, Amy?
I guess in an effort to hit some middle ground here, I just would maybe make the following observation. I do concur to an extent with administration that getting involved in invoices starts to bog us down and get us into minutia that maybe is or is not our role. But I also concur that part of our job is oversight. And if there is a number of board members who feel like there's some degree of oversight that would benefit them, I think that makes sense. And the last observation I'll make is, well, yes, we certainly don't review invoices routinely from a variety of contractors. This particular situation is a really funky and unique one. We're using taxpayer funds to provide a service that is, by its nature, a little bit nebulous, right? It is about relations and contacts and all these things, which have a lot to do, which is hard to reduce to numbers in general. But at the same time, like everything, we like to measure things in life, and we like to try and look at numbers when we can to have a sense of confidence in the process that's going on. So, I'd like to see us perhaps finally check this box that this task has been done, and we've kind of looked at some of these things. And I do think the foundation has been extraordinarily successful, and we've definitely seen the results of what we're looking for. We've also lived through a really weird past 3 or 4 years, COVID not the only thing, with big building projects and other things. So trying to dissect down into what has the most meaning in terms of looking at results can be tricky in this particular situation. So I can understand that some people would feel more reassured to have a little bit more data behind them. So there are just some observations on both sides of the spectrum as to, what everybody's getting into. So my hope would be maybe we can take a look at these. Hopefully most people will feel a lot more comfortable, and we can be done and move forward and feel good about being reassured. Thanks.
Can I ask, do any of the board members have knowledge of what the financials look like for this year for the foundation? The foundation's raised well over $240,000 before capital campaign money. With capital campaign money this year, it'll be approaching $400,000. I think that is something that maybe your board representative to the foundation and I should be providing some more of that information regarding metrics. I think that that's very important, and your board representative is aware of that. And I'm sorry if I'm letting you down. I believe I need more direction on what it is that will make you feel more comfortable. But I thought we had some things in place to provide that clarity. The foundation will also be providing an annual report, and we have that scheduled to come sometime in August.
Okay, Randy, thank you. I think, those numbers are, impressive and certainly indicating a really successful effort. I am hearing a majority of the board asking. My understanding is probably that simply that those invoices be provided to board members. Laurel, I see your hand up again, so I'll let you.
Thank you. I do appreciate all the success the foundation's had this year, and my thinking was more along the lines of we've said again and again, we're in it for the long haul, and we could have a year, and this could have been one, where the income doesn't reflect the effort that's put in. That's the nature of fundraising. And there are other metrics besides the dollars or even the absolute number of donors that reflect the ongoing effort, and we hope to see results in the future. And that's really where I was thinking, and I'm not sure those are even, our annual report tells the story of the district and the success of the foundation and how the money is used more than the sort of longer term cultivation type of activities. So that's really where I'm looking for, just making sure that our long-term effort that we can't see in year to year necessarily in any one year shows up.
All right, any other discussion? So to be sure that I understand what everyone is asking for, what the majority of the board is asking for, is it simply to have those invoices provided electronically, perhaps via email? I see Jim's hand.
Amber, are you asking for all invoices backward and forward?
I'm not asking for any, I'm trying to understand since 5 people I think would be helpful, I want to make sure that I understand what documentation in what format would be helpful.
I think we should have a motion on what the board is directing us to do in managing our foundation director. And Randy didn't have in his update, the foundation director on his own also has $1 million gift on the hook that many of you are aware of that we had nothing to do with. So, I'm not sure what we need to do to meet your expectations. If you want to see every invoice coming and going, we'll do it. I just think we want some clear direction.
Okay, Jim, I saw your hand.
Yeah, so I don't know that I'm going to answer your question right out, but I do agree that sometimes the metrics aren't, exactly correlated with effort. That being said, one of the reasons that I believe we hired Randy and we renewed his contract was that he is acting on our behalf, overseeing this function. And so I trust Randy, and so I trust him to oversee this function of the school district. And that's sort of where I am. If Randy reviews the receipts, which he said he does, and then before he gives the payment, any sensible financial officer would do that. I have to trust that, and I have to say that I agree with him providing that sort of financial oversight.
They also go through my office, and I give the final approval after I see every invoice coming in on development. Obviously, Randy does a lot more with the foundation board and all the activities happening than me. I'm pulled in when I'm needed on certain things, but I just wanted to assure you that it's not one person looking at those. Our office staff, all of our executive secretaries, Kim Eastwood runs point on managing all of those when they come out of the finance office. So there's a team of people who go through that information coming from that particular contractor, not just Randy.
Great. Dan?
Yeah, this is, when I think about this particular issue and this question, I think back to the early years of my time on the board when it wasn't quite as productive an activity, and we were spending more money than we were bringing in by a long shot. So I think if going back to that, it's not, from my part, it's not unusual to still, in a sense, have lingering questions about the relationship between the development office and us. And again, as a contractor, and I'll speak to this personally, there have been a couple of instances where I've served as an independent contractor, and I wouldn't just simply drop off a report and say, here's a report on a student that I assisted in the evaluation. Please hand over $1,500. I needed to account for the work and effort and time that went into that. So there is this relationship between a contractor and the business office. How much detail we want to immerse ourselves into, that is a related question, but I think that's a serious one too. We don't want to get into the weeds with this stuff, but some assurance I think would be helpful to understand on the basis of what is being measured through the invoices. Is it time? Is it productivity in terms of contributions that are tied to the contract? What is it? And that would be helpful for me. I don't need to get into every invoice or see them necessarily, but I would like to know in the same way that, Randy reports to us all the time about expenditures and about revenues and is giving us detailed information all the time about the work of his office. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think that we got to ask, well, what are the kinds of things we're looking at, and on the base, and what is the basis for compensation? And it's got to go beyond simply the metrics that are built into the contract, but beyond that, it doesn't have to. I don't want to get into a lot of specific details about the content of every invoice. I don't want to touch that at all. I think that's not worth everyone's time to get immersed at that level of specificity. But I still think it's reasonable to ask, well, what are we looking at? What are we evaluating? And at least describe it qualitatively. That's my take on it.
All right, Lori.
Last comment. Yeah, what Dan said is very much my thinking. It's not a matter of not trusting the oversight. It's that I don't know what I'm approving when I say that I'm approving of the work that because I'm not, like Dan said, I'm not sure what is being, how on a monthly basis the work is being evaluated as being complete for payment. So just to have a sense for, as Dan said, is it money raised? Is it hours put in? Like we've just sort of been operating in this murky world of not really knowing what constitutes work and accomplishment for that. So that I just would like to see an example of what we're talking about. That's all.
So could I suggest, would 3 or 4 months of invoices of the most recent 3 or 4 months be adequate for board members? Would they like to see one recent one from 6 months ago and one from a year ago as an example over time? Those would seem to be maybe some parameters that perhaps we could give administration. What do board members think would be most representative to help them? A smattering over time, perhaps 3 to 4 invoices?
Scott?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to go back to Bob's comment, and I'd like to have somebody, so we have a motion on the table regarding the contract.
Mm-hmm.
After that motion is either carried or defeated, I'd like to see somebody make a motion about exactly what they would like to see and let the board vote on that motion.
Okay. But I think
that was a suggestion I was trying to get to. So I'm sorry if you thought I was trying to get off topic. I'm just trying to pin down what we're going to ask for.
Yeah, I was just
going to be asked
of a motion. Yep.
Right, and I think Amy's trying to get asking people to get a sense of what we're asking for. They're asking for so that we can produce a motion. I do have just a quick question. Are these documents basically public documents that would be available via right to know in any case?
Yes.
Okay, Gretchen, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think is perhaps making it so that nobody is making a motion for something specific is that we don't really have any idea what we're talking about in terms of, I don't know if there are on average, 100 invoices a month or 2. And so in terms of Amy's question, do you want to see 3 over 4 years or what? I mean, that's a data question that you'd have to have some parameters of what the data look like. And I don't have a picture of what the data would look like in order to ask for it. So I was kind of wondering, and then, just to move along, because we're spending a lot of time on this, would it not just be faster and more efficient if Laurel just files the right to know for whatever invoices she was interested in, and then she can share it with board members who want to see it, and the board members that don't want to see it don't have to look at it?
My understanding was that isn't there a monthly invoice?
Yes,
Correct.
It's a monthly invoice.
Okay. Dr. O'Donnell?
I was going to suggest, because we're hearing different things from individuals, maybe charging the finance committee with asking for what you might want as a board. Sending invoices isn't a big deal. I've had many discussions with individual board members. It's then the follow-up explanations on everything, and you have a board member who's your liaison to that whole function with the foundation board. So I think the clarity might be able to come around. Discussion, reviewing invoices isn't a big deal, but where are we going to go then moving forward? Do you want to see them moving forward, or do you want them to be part of annual or biannual reports? And I think that would give us clarity. I think that would be helpful for me.
Laurel?
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's comments. What I had been asking for was basically the monthly invoices, and my intent was not to take a magnifying glass to them, but just to see that there was some degree of documentation. When I asked for this via Right to Know for the last a few years or so ago, what I learned was that the invoices for every month said fundraising until I think the month when I filed the Right to Know. And fundraising to me did not have the detail as I recall that final one. It did. I don't recall what was on it. And my goal here was not to look at the actual, I'm not a professional fundraiser. I like the idea of charging the finance committee with a sort of ongoing, just even once a year, whatever. We actually, a couple of years ago during a finance committee meeting, had someone come speak with us about what type of metrics are good to look at. And so I think that really is a good function for the finance committee.
Okay. I guess my sense is we could have a discussion in the finance committee. I'm not sure that everyone who's asking for the just to have an opportunity to look at the invoices is necessarily seeking a discussion so much as simply to review them. Am I correct in understanding that?
Yes.
I think we just email you out the invoices, but I would request, rather than peppering Randy with questions, because that's what happens when I see all the emails from individuals away from the board table, I would request that he's not tasked with having 9 different conversations, and that would flow through committee, because that's not how this thing always works.
I think that would make sense if we're going to have a discussion about them, that after receiving them, simply to have the finance committee be the location for a discussion. If there's a desire to put that on an agenda for the finance committee. That's a reason. Questions. Okay, Scott?
Yeah, could we just have that as a topic at the next or the second finance committee, where we will review the last 12 months or the last 12 months of invoices will be presented to the finance committee, and whoever is interested in participating in that discussion can queue into that finance committee meeting.
That'd be fine with me.
I'm okay with that.
That would meet what I was looking for, sure.
That's great. Good idea, Scott.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have any objection to that? Okay. So we go back to the motion that's on the table then to make sure we're keeping track of where we are. It's the motion. I'm sorry, I had to move my screen. This is the motion to extend the contract for the development officer shown in attachment 6F. So if there any other conversation on that motion. Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, then seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Mr. Fazzard?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. The next item, item G, is a motion to extend the memorandum of understanding with the SCASD Education Foundation. This is shown in attachment 6G.
Adele, so moved.
Amber,
Yes.
I'm sorry. before we move on to the next motion, I just had a request, since the contract that we see actually still has some blanks in it.
Item G, you mean?
Yes, the development contract.
Wait, do you mean item F for the development officer, or item G for the MOU?
I thought G was the development officer extension. Maybe the numbers changed since when I downloaded it.
I'm working from.
Sorry. Yeah, I was talking about the development officer extension that we just did. What I was going to ask is that we, right now it has the blanks.
Mm-hmm.
And it refers back to the 18-19 year, but doesn't have the specifics, I don't think. That we just get at some point as an update, maybe when we talk in finance, what those actual numbers are.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sorry, I was just trying to open up the document to make sure I understand the question.
Right now, it just has, for example, 283 unique donors, that we actually get what the numbers are instead of, for example.
Oh, I see. Okay.
At a time in the future, before a year from now.
Okay. Okay, gotcha. All right. So I'm sorry, that was for the development officer. Not, yeah, okay. The one we just voted on. Okay. Then moving on. I'm sorry, I was working from my agenda planning document, which I think we've shifted some items around since then. So I'm sorry if I got the letter.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, thanks.
We updated some numbers Friday.
Okay.
So
so then item G is a motion to extend the memorandum of understanding with the Skaddacy Education Foundation. This is shown in attachment 6G.
Also moved.
Leah, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Okay, Laurel?
Yeah, there were two things that make me uncomfortable with this. And one is that we've been saying all along that as things move along, eventually the foundation could be self-sufficient. And I think that is an important piece. Right now, the way things are with the district providing the expenses, beyond startup expenses, it sort of skews things because it can give people an inaccurate look at what's actually being raised. So that I have hoped all along that we could get to a point where the foundation was self-sustaining. And this, as like this past year, it would have been self-sustaining, as well as I think the year before. So I don't see a need for the district to continue to use our budget this way. In addition, this is written with the goal of the foundation making $120,000 this year, which we already have said we expect to get more. And given that that's what we had set it as 3 years ago and said we expected it to increase each year, I had asked why it's still at 120,000 that we expect.
It says an amount equal to or greater than 120. That was to cover the amount of the district commitment, the district budget or an allocation for the running of the foundation. You are absolutely correct that there had been discussions and an expectation that over time the foundation would pay more of their own bills and there would be less of a requirement from the district. However, those discussions and conversations had not been productive and in large part had not been able to be completed during the last 6 months of this year. Much of is result of the pandemic that we've all been interacting. The other thing that would have to happen before a the foundation could use any of its money any of the money raised would be, the MOU would have to be changed, because the MOU says that all of the money will go to the district. And so, yes, the foundation had a very successful year last year, but it could not use any of that money until the MOU was changed, because it says that all of the money will be turned over to the district for district programming. So it's I don't know if you call it a chicken and an egg scenario, but I think that it is pretty synonymous there, at least in my time, in my mind, excuse me.
I guess I have the sense that there's some advantage because when the district is providing for those expenses in that way, we have a more of a clear connection with the Education Foundation. That linkage and oversight function between the district and the foundation remains pretty strong. And I think, if we all want to move towards that eventually, this year was not a year in which we were going to have time and opportunity to have a lot of those conversations. So that's my 2 cents on it. Dan, I saw your hand next.
Yeah, just following on your comment, Amber. In the conversations we had with the officers of the foundation it seemed like it was about a year ago, maybe a little bit before that. One of the impressions I had about that experience was that they might have been, in their inclination to look at the future, I think we're looking at things, an arrangement that would create more independence on their part. And I don't want to deny that interest on their part. However, when it comes to having the work of the foundation and all of the work of the contributions of the benefactors involved and so on, when we look at that, we want as much of it to connect with our mission and our everyday needs and goals as we possibly can. If we set them free, you just don't know what you're going to get. They may be closely aligned to our needs and our functions and the views of our administration and the board and the needs of our students, or it might not be so much, especially as time goes on and their leadership may change, our leadership may change. So I like the idea that it is aligned with them and that we wind up, my glasses are weird, we wind up having to, as Randy has described it, we have a relatively close linkage in terms of the financials involved. Well, the best example I can think of is the way in which they worked closely with us last year to work on the theme for the Maroon and Gray banquet. They developed a theme around mental health support for our students, the Mental Health Matters Fund, which continues to this day. And I think that it was our relationship, a defined relationship, that created the conditions under which that initiative was developed. So I personally think that this interwoven way in which we work together, both programming-wise and financially, I think serves us in terms of our needs as a school district, and also serves them in terms of helping to define their role and their opportunities to contribute to the community. So I think it's a good thing that we have that connection through the MOU.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Amy?
Yeah, I just was going to reiterate some of the things that you were saying, that while there have been discussions about shifts in the relationship, it's not a simple thing where we could just gradually back down the contributions from the district in a quick way. We're not agile enough to make sudden changes because, as Randy alluded to, not only does the MOU have certain statements, but also the bylaws of the creation of the foundation, I believe, also has similar statements within it. So legally, the foundation isn't permitted to use any of the funds that they're given to fund their operations the way they're structured at this time. So there's a lot of work that would need to be done before that foundation is structured and set up, and changes that would have to happen before they could function independently, regardless of who desires that or doesn't desire that. There's just logistics to be overcome. And there were some preliminary talks about heading in that direction, but there wasn't 100%, I don't think, consensus that there was, that stability could be counted on. And certainly there have been several years that the foundation has done very, very well, and we're really pleased with what the district's investment has been in it. And we'd like to presume that's going to continue on for sure. But in terms of the longevity or the existence of a development organization, the foundation is still incredibly young. And so we want it to be successful for the long haul. And that means maintaining, some degree of supports potentially for some period of time. And should that change in the next couple of years, that's possible. So I just want to be careful that there's not a perception that like it was supposed to go one direction and suddenly we're saying that we're not headed that direction anymore. I think that's just a matter of timing and creating a transition plan, just like we do for kids or for any other big change. We need to plan well and make sure we have a transition plan to get there, should that be the direction that we wind up going. So that's it.
Scott, I think I saw your hand next.
Yeah, just to piggyback on some of the things that Amy said, I don't recall whether the bylaws limited the ability to expend fund for operations. It may very well be, I just don't recall, but the bylaws do specifically say that all foundation funds have to go to the district, and the district has to be able to accept those funds in order for the foundation to provide them. So whether there's an MOU or not, and whether there's one set of leadership at the district or another set at the foundation, and whether that changes, the foundation has to provide all of its funds back to the district. So it has to align itself just inherently based on its bylaws. It has to align itself with whatever the district desires for the fundraising. So right there, and that was an intentional hook that was created in the bylaws so that 20 years in the future, when none of us are here, that we're still going to have a foundation that, whether there's an MOU or not, is still directly tied to the needs of the district. I would say, regardless of what goals may or may not have existed 6 or 9 months ago, there were definitely conversations regarding what the next MOU would look like. But the reality is, in February, we got hit with COVID and everything went on hold, just as Mr. Leos read the statement regarding the SCAE negotiations. I mean, lots of contractual considerations hit renewal mode. They weren't going to be renegotiated. They were just going to be renewed as is. And this is just another, example of one where we're staying the course. And, perhaps next year there is a conversation about tweaking the MOU, or perhaps not. But I just want to be really clear that any concerns regarding whether there is or is not an MOU, the bylaws address all of those concerns. And just another reminder that, if my memory serves me, in order for the bylaws to change, the board representative has to vote in favor of that bylaw change. So everybody on the foundation board could want to start giving money somewhere else, and the SCASD representative to the board votes no, and the bylaws do not change. So there are a lot of hooks in this that, regardless of the MOU, that relationship is required to be very, very clear and have a great amount of synergy between what we need and what the foundation is trying to provide.
Okay, Laurel? Still on mute.
Sorry, there we go. Just to clarify, the MOU is written now, just says that that we would get the board would get the net profits. rather than the gross products. So I don't think that's a concern. I do just want to point out, moving forward and slightly looking back, the last MOU said the parties should review the terms of the agreement for renewal by January 1st, which was well before COVID. And this one says we should review the terms by next January. So we shouldn't wait till next March. We should be doing it in this coming 6 months if we want a change for a year from now. I just wanted to make sure that to draw everyone's attention to that date at the bottom of the MOU.
Yeah, and if I could just add, starting the conversations and completing them, as you're alluding to, in 30 days or 45 days prior to COVID would have hit, is not a realistic expectation either. They were started in January.
I'm sorry, I think it says they were supposed to be by January 1st.
Started or finished?
It says that review the terms for renewal by January 1st. That's what the language says.
Okay. Well, but review is like a process. So yeah, in any case, here we are. So is there any other? Okay. All right. Is anyone in the public would like to make a public comment? Okay. All right, then we'll have a roll call vote on this item, which is the motion to extend the MOU with the SCASD Education Foundation shown in attachment 6G.
Mr. Hutchinson,
Yes.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Zidney,
No.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item H is a motion to approve the agreement with Penn Highlands Healthcare for the 2020-2021 school year. This is shown in attachment 6H.
Duffy, so moved.
Dell, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded.
If I could just point out that this is actually a 2-year agreement. The motion only calls for 1, but it actually is a 2-year.
Oh, okay, thanks. So the motion should be a motion to approve agreement with Penn Highlands Healthcare for 2020 through 2022.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, no questions? Is there any public comment? Okay, we will have a roll call vote then.
Mr. Leos,
Yes.
Ms. Zidney,
Yes.
Dr. Bader,
Yes.
Ms. Bedell,
Yes.
Ms. Brandt,
Yes.
Concepcion,
Yes.
Dr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. You'll move now to the portion of the agenda. Item A is the draft pandemic safety plan. This is shown in 7A. Okay, and I'll call on Dr. O'Donnell first to kick off the discussion on this item.
Sorry about that. I'm going to share a few overview points, and then I'm going to ask Gene Canals and Ed Popper to provide an overview of what we've presented to you, the draft pandemic health and safety plan. As I reflect on the key constraints that are in the plan, they're based on safety recommendations from physicians, including our district physician, who's a pediatrician and a parent, epidemiologists who are studying evidence regarding the spread of the virus, and our certified school nurses who've been working with Gene Canals some long days to get us to this point. And the plan is key for us to move forward with our education model development. Although that is happening at the same time, we need to make sure those constraints are really understood so that we can work with those to develop the plan. We have A large number of faculty working with our curriculum directors and principals develop the best plan possible for the fall. And we want to take their energy and keep it moving forward as the board is given a robust and safe plan if we're able to be in schools in the fall. Central to the plan for in-school instruction, we'll maintain social distancing at 6 feet. And faculty, staff, and students will wear masks. Both measures are critical to the effectiveness of our contact tracing, which Jean will highlight once we get into the discussion. So prior to moving forward with further details with that ed model, we want to ensure the focus is on the safety plan. And that's going to drive those opportunities we provide kids if we're able to be in school. As far as how this impacts families, we're developing 2 options, in-school learning and a virtual academy option. We'll speak to those a little bit later this week for our families as we're developing our responses to many questions. We're planning a much more in-depth update regarding the educational model in the near future. This week we'll touch on and answer what questions we can. Obviously, we're going to really focus on the safety related questions as we work through the week. Although we shared some key impacts from this safety plan, we have teachers from around the district, as I said, who are taking the feedback from students, parents, and faculty to improve upon our spring experience, because we might be in that situation again this year. We had an emergency experience in the spring. Now we're preparing for that with much more robust educational experiences, regardless of if we're in schools or we're working remotely. So prior to asking questions about the plan, I'm going to turn it over to Jean Knaus, our Director of Student Services, and Ed Poprick, Director of Physical Plant. They're going to share an overview of the draft to date, and then we'll open it up to questions from board members. So thanks, Jean and Ed.
Yep. Thanks, Bob. So I just a few overviews that I wanted to give. Just the primary goal of this entire plan was getting students and staff and faculty back in our buildings safely. And the primary focus was really reducing the risk of the spread of the virus. Since we received the template around June 10th, we've had over 45 meetings regarding this plan. And I believe our 9 certified school nurses have been at every single one. So I just wanted to start with that. I'm now going to hand it over to Ed to go over the cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting and ventilation steps. And then I'll take over from there. So Ed.
Sure. Thanks, Jean.
Sure.
Many of you saw this plan at a Tuesday committee meeting, and the gist of the plan remains the same. I understand there were some discussions and some suggestions at that meeting, which we are looking at, but please understand that we have not had enough time since Tuesday to evaluate those suggestions. So you're seeing a very similar draft of what you saw on Tuesday for those of you who attended that meeting. I will not read verbatim this lengthy series of recommendations, but I'll highlight some of the key points, and I will focus on the column which is labeled the green phase. First, in working with our cleaning and sanitizing and disinfecting, we will use the CDC and Pennsylvania Department of Health as our guidelines for procedures. Those procedures have been evolving over the course of time, so we do not want to lock in a set of procedures in this plan that might evolve. So we will continue to monitor those recommendations and follow those recommendations as our standard operating procedure. We have recommended that during the green phase, as we try desperately to get these buildings open for our students, that we close our facilities to outside groups. Part of our logic there is that this is going to be a Herculean effort just to manage our own activities and to maintain our own plan and to do adequate cleaning, disinfecting, and all of the other building operation management activities that we're responsible for. So in order to try to do that as best we can for our students and our programs, we are recommending that we temporarily close the buildings to outside groups to enable us to keep our focus on our programs. We are committing to have our custodians disinfect the entire building on a nightly basis. Additionally, to disinfect prior to any after-school activities, between the end of the school day, prior to any after-school activities, and then again after-school activities. We are looking at increasing our frequency of cleaning for bathrooms and locker rooms. We are looking to close water fountains, but to expand the use of water bottle filling stations and cleaning around those items. We have a series of materials that would be available, which comes from EPA and or CDC guidelines. That list is in your handout. And we're also going to continue to promote safe practices around hand washing and social distancing. Moving on to talk more about our systems, we will need to flush our water systems prior to reopening the buildings. We are going to make sure that all of our HVAC systems are functioning and operating properly. We're going to take steps to try to increase outdoor air exchanges and reduce the amount of recycled air. Where possible, we will increase the efficiency of our HVAC filters. We're going to evaluate various rooms around the district to determine which rooms might require additional air filtration, potentially through HEPA filters or other means, and work towards getting those installed. And finally, we will look at, as we move towards the fall heating season, we will look at the ability to increase relative humidity, which we do not currently have in our buildings. But based on current thinking, the lower humidity levels in the winter time during heating season promote virus transmission. So we will prepare a plan to humidify as much as possible to help alleviate this concern. That's the standard review of where we are. And Jean, I'll turn it back to you for the rest of the plan.
Thanks, Ed. So just to kind of lay out the lay of the land here, when we talk about the yellow phase, we're talking primarily about faculty and staff being in attendance in schools. And when we're talking in the green phase, we know that students will be in attendance. This plan really lays out the lead individuals of each area, the materials and resources, and any professional development needed related to the topics we're discussing. So the first overview, I'll give a brief overview of each section, and then if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. So the first section is social distancing and other safety protocols. And the first topic that we're going to talk about there, which Bob alluded to, was the 6-foot social distancing requirement. And so we are looking at the layout of each classroom and how we can make that happen, reminding in the hallways when classes are walking down to certain places to maintain that. We know in the high school that's not going to be a possibility, or the middle school of changing of classes, but we know we have a 6 or a 10 to 15 minute window of being in someone's space. And we know that changing of classes is much shorter than that. When we talk about the cafeteria and what we can do in that space, we work very closely with Megan Shaper in working out what makes the most sense with what she has regarding with safety and also labor intensity. Do we bring the food to the students, or do the students go to the food? And we will look at that depending on each building, what makes the most sense in those areas. Knowing that we're going to have box lunches for the first couple of weeks, it's very important, or first couple of months probably, it's very important to Megan that she maintain high quality food, but the requirements with the box lunches may lead to larger amounts of waste, and she's worked with Ed Paulbrick in disposing of that. So there's a lot of details. I bring that to your attention just to recognize the number of details we need to work through. We anticipate a higher number of free and reduced lunch, which requires a lot more logging of information. And so depending on how that plays out, would it be safer or better to have the students go down and get their lunch and come back to their classroom, or have the lunches delivered? So we're still working through some of those. We will give you updates as we go through that process. When we talk about hygiene practices for students and staff, including the manner and frequency, we're recommending that the students wash their hands and staff upon arrival, before and after they leave for any kind of specials or other purposes, before lunch and after lunch, and then mid-afternoon. Looking to really emphasize that part and really make it part of a routine. So we'll look to work with staff on what that would look like throughout the year. We also have identified a lot of signage that we will include throughout the buildings for germ prevention, appropriate mask wearing, social distancing, COVID symptoms, things like that. We have identified places where those will be placed. We're looking at visitors and what that would look like and reducing the numbers, requiring masks and social distancing, holding virtual meetings whenever possible. Kind of going through this with you kind of rapidly. Handling sports and activities related to physical education classes with CDC guidelines, and work with Tracy Edelman to really kind of talk about what this would look like and what recess would look like. We will have recess. They do not need to wear their masks outside, although we will not be allowing them to be on their new playgrounds, unfortunately. Sanitizing those is just too labor intensive for our custodial staff. For PE, inside will wear a mask and maintain social distancing. Outside, they will not need to wear a mask, and they will maintain social distancing outside also. Natatorium, there's a few different aspects there, and you can look at that. With the humidity levels there's a little bit lower risk, but we require masks until they get in the pool. That course in particular is actually a smaller course that they offer, so the social distancing will be something that they can practice there. Limiting the sharing of materials among students. This is something our education model will look at when it comes to library books and things like that. But if it is equipment or items that students will have one touch, we will make sure that those are sanitized after each use. For example, in the fitness center, we would make sure that the students are actually sanitizing those the equipment in there or the staff, as they always have done. We won't require students to do any kind of sanitizing throughout the school day. Staggering the use of space, and they'll work individually with faculty or with the building principals on that and what that would look like in those buildings. One of the areas right now that is really under investigation still is the transportation. Just to give you an idea of what that would look like, if we social distanced on the bus, we would be able to transport 12 students at a time. That would mean an estimated number of about 131 more buses just for elementary transport. So we realize that's not even a possibility. So we're looking to other options and looking, once we survey families and find out what are the numbers going to be on the bus, and do we have the ability to have family members or COVID friendly neighborhood friends sitting together, what those numbers might look like, and then what our options are. So we're still investigating that and looking at how we're going to roll that out. Going through this document, I'm going to keep going through here. Monitoring the students and staff health. We're looking at screenings and monitoring systems, and we'll do that. We've talked about several things. We've talked about doing mass screenings as students got on the bus, or mass screenings when students arrived to school. Both come with some difficulties. On the bus, we anticipate a child coming in and screening and having a fever, sending them home, not knowing if someone's going to be in the home when they go back is always a concern. So we're looking at, if we do that on the way into the buildings, what does that look like? And do we have a long line behind us? We do have enough thermometers to manage that, but we're leaning more towards students, families signing off on the screening process that they're going to commit to every day, and our staff also. So going through our quarantine isolation rooms, we do have a process that we'll put in place for sending students to the isolation room, following the guidelines of what the symptoms are related to the COVID virus. And we will, we have identified or in the process of identifying a room in each building. Depending on the building, that also depends on the recommendations of an ideal isolation room might not be possible. So we'll have to do the best we can in those spaces. And then also having a team in each building that's going to help us with having eyes on people who are in that isolation room. If there are more than one student in there, making sure they are masked, they are socially distanced, preparing students for what that's going to look like if a teacher or a nurse comes down in all garb with mask and gloves and their coverings that might scare a child. So making sure we're training and getting everyone up to par as to what this is going to look like and feel like when they come back. Moving through the plan, returning, isolating, quarantining staff and students. As far as notifications and coming back, we would, any student who or staff who comes up positive, we would make sure that we have identified through contact tracing the students or staff that are exposed in that process. We will make sure all those that are exposed are individually notified. We will notify the building that there has been a positive identification in that building. And then we will notify district-wide that we do have a positive case. When we want to think about the tipping point of what that number might be, we have read some research related to the number 5. And that number 5 really correlates to the number of contact trace people related to that, which usually can be anywhere from 8 to 10. So if you have 5 students or 5 staff identified as COVID positive, you can roughly estimate 40 to 50 other people have been infected or could have been. And so that's where, you know, it's in the community. That was just one study that we received. We're actually working with Meg Small and Matt Ferrari, who are getting a IRB approved actually this evening to really help us look at that process a little bit better. Are we going to look at the number of positives, or are we going to look at the number of contact traced individuals and what that looks like? Through that study, I feel we'll get more explicit information on what that might look like. We anticipate that we will work together as a team and using our community providers who are on our committee in discussing any kind of potential shutdowns that we might do throughout the year based on what those numbers look like. And I discussed notifying families, just make sure I have this right. Other considerations for students and staff, as Bob alluded to, the mask wearing, we're going to make sure to enforce 100% mask wearing. We realize this is a big ask, but in order for us to contact trace, one of the questions we need to ask is, were you wearing your mask 100% of the time? And if not, who weren't you wearing your mask in front of, right? And how close were you in that space for social distancing? So ironically, the Department of Health has not been able to provide us with those contact tracing steps yet because it's kind of a moving target, but we hope to be able to have something very explicit that we can work from. In addition, in working with Meg Small and Matt Ferrari, we're hoping that they may be able to help us with that process too. So the contact tracing is probably one of the biggest, for lack of a better word, hairball into this is just really making sure that we're hitting all those people who could have been exposed when there is a positive case. We will train on proper face coverings. It does say use of face covering or mask and shields. And so we were told masks protect you from spreading, shields protect you from getting. Best scenario would be to wear both. But we know that's not always an option. And we know there's some concerns about wearing face coverings for some of our more at risk or populations. And we're looking into other options for that, working closely with Heather Pringle, Sharon Salter up till today was her last day, and Katie Ricker, and really making sure we're looking at those cases on an individual basis and building those their health plan around that. Moving forward. Strategic deployment of staff. We'll work with HR if we need to do anything especially related to that. And I think I pretty much gave a brief summary of every section. As you move down, you'll see we did try to put together a professional development plan. This will also be a moving target as things become, as we develop the processes and systems more. Right now, this is the what. Now we got to figure out the how. So that'll be our next step in doing that. And I think that's what I have. If anyone has any questions, I'm able to answer. I'm happy to answer them for you.
Okay. Lori, I see your hand.
I thank you, Jean and Ed, for all the work on this, and special shout out to all the nurses who have been so deeply and consistently engaged. Just a question. Do we have a plan for when the students go outside, for example, and they don't need their masks? Where do they put their masks?
We don't have that plan yet, but that'll be a process we work through as we figure out our systems. Do they hook them on their desk and walk out? That would still fall into that, 10 to 15 minute social distancing window. So I think we could probably manage something like that,
Okay.
that remains on their person or remains on their desk.
Okay, great. Yeah, just as I was reading through this earlier, I thought, oh, this is great. Oh, but what? Yeah, great. And then, I've heard and seen from parents this concern about, young kids being uncomfortable in masks, and they don't feel confident that their kids will be able to manage a day in a mask. And I understand that. Is there any guidance that we can be providing for parents through the coming weeks of the summer to prepare their young children to be able to wear a mask for several hours a day?
Right. So we're speaking to the pediatricians today, and the American Academy of Pediatrics just came out with a report. And their suggestion is to try to get kids to gradually wear them a little bit longer every day, walking them through and understanding the discomfort and how that will go away. They'll get used to it. So you bring up a good point, though, and looking at something a little bit more explicit is maybe getting started right now. If this plan is approved, what can we provide as a resource to families? I think we could definitely look into something like that.
Great. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Was that me?
Yeah, you have your hand up.
Okay. Yeah, I do. Yeah, quick question for Ed in terms of, getting, and I'm sure we probably do this every year anyway, but, some of these buildings haven't been used in a while. So there's some prep even to get them ready for when the teachers return and everything, in terms of have the, air conditioning systems been idle, what goes on with starting that up. So
So a couple key points there, and you're right, Jim. It is, it's probably more evident this year than previous years, but it's certainly something we deal with, on a yearly basis in terms of, the 9-month school calendar and closing down for this summer and restarting. But anyway, two of the key points are, to flush the domestic water system, because stagnant water is a health concern, and that's beyond COVID. That's simply because our buildings have been idle since March, basically, and there's an increased stagnation there, if that's the proper terminology. And the other one would be to, we're looking at, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks ahead of the first day of school, or ahead of the first day of teachers coming back, is ramping up our HVAC systems to full occupied mode, as opposed to any sort of a setback mode, so that we'd be operating and flushing the buildings and getting air exchanges, and not, and at that same time evaluating outside air dampers, make sure they're working properly, and just to have a fully functioning building that has that has been running for a while prior to major staff returning, and obviously prior to students returning.
Good. Yeah. Thanks a lot. That's important. And like I said, I assume you do it every year, but there's more attention to it this year. So, Jean, in terms of library books, Schlow Library's been been open for a couple weeks now in terms of picking up reserved books. So they have some guidelines. Obviously, I don't think Penn State's libraries opened yet in terms of picking up reserve books, but they obviously there's some waiting time period after I return a book before it gets put back in the general circulation. So maybe touch base with them, and then I think the other thing, and maybe I read too much into what you were saying in terms of, if we decide to shut down or go back to remote work, it's that might not be our decision, right? So that might be the state health department's decision or the county's decision whether we go back into some sort of yellow or red criterion. So it could be completely out of our hands.
Correct. If they go to yellow, we would not be in school. But if we don't go into yellow and we have active cases, we may have to have conversations of what that might mean.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all I have, Amber.
Okay, great. Scott?
Yeah, thanks. I guess, so several questions and comments. And first of all, I mean, this is an incredibly complex and challenging process. So, any of my questions, are not in any way intended to be dismissive or critical. I mean, this has been a Herculean effort that has already been expended. It's going to continue to be expended. And I recognize that every option creates really a high challenge and a high burden to the administration, the staff, the students. My questions really revolve around wondering whether we fully vetted the opportunity to have every kid in class every day. I'm not saying we didn't vet it, but whether we fully vetted it. I look at ironically, I look at the PD document and their suggestions, and the first suggestion that they make is that you select the type of reopening. And for me, that should be at the end. You should go through all of the safety protocol that you think you can and cannot do, and then you determine whether you think you can reopen in one phase or another phase versus pre-selecting what it is you're going to do. So that in itself to me seems backwards. But I was curious, and I apologize if this was said at some point and I missed it. I know that there's several groups that are involved in working through the plan, but in terms of the reopening, the PD suggestion was, how did you engage stakeholders in the type of reopening that was selected? And I was just curious about that. And again, I apologize if that was already discussed that I missed, but I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, whether that's Jean or Bob or whatever.
So I can address the recommendation from the safety committee based on the education and knowledge that we've been sharing and working with. And then I think Bob will probably take over as how we made our decision. When PD had someone conduct a study for them, and they listed 6 options. And they took the do nothing option right down to the cohort option of having small groups move together. They did this with the tipping point of 5 cases being where they would measure how long it took to get to 5 cases based on this plan from A to G, from nothing to cohorts. And the time it took to get to 1 with doing nothing was like 1 day, where the time it took to get to 5 cases with the cohort was more days. So when we took the safety plan on, our number 1 focus was health, the safety and reducing the risk. What do we need to do to reduce the risk? And so our recommendations moving forward have been small groups, reduce the risk, wear the mask, social distance. And we focus that around what our recommendations of moving forward were. And so I'll let Bob speak to why we picked what we picked.
You bet. Well, when we look at elementary and secondary, and we're not finished yet getting ready, this is what we're hoping allows us to get into schools. When you look at the size of secondary schools and our curricular experiences, although we're working on a change in schedule that still allows students to access the same curriculum they would in our prior schedule, we're trying to reduce contacts because classrooms aren't managed as they are in elementary. In elementary, every core classroom teacher and those students, we have an opportunity for them to spread out in a classroom by moving everything out except the desks. This isn't the ideal experience for students to return to school, mind you. But in a secondary classroom, we don't have the ability to spread out and then obviously then to sanitize to the same degree because we're changing. So we're obviously going to have to sanitize if we're going to have 4 classes a day and students are going to change. We still have to figure that out and who's all responsible for that. So this isn't a done deal on getting back into school for the fall. The 6 feet isn't feasible when you have 22,000 some students in the high school. Some of those classrooms, and you've been in there, the smaller rooms, if we have every kid in there, that's 2 kids at a table. They're not individual desks to begin with, but that wouldn't even be feasible to have all the kids in the classroom. So we're really hamstrung with the 6 feet. If the board wants to take the 6 feet rule out, and there are counties in the state that aren't abiding by it, we told you how we got to this point by speaking with physicians on the team as well as the rest of the team. But if we want to not have the 6 feet and you want to have school every day, we can do that. We just don't think it abides with the safety piece, especially with the 15-minute rule. So our classes are 90 minutes. If we're lucky, once we figure out the transportation, I don't see it schedule staying intact as is because of the challenges we're going to have with transporting students, but we're not there yet with that. So as far as stakeholder input, we really utilize stakeholder input on what we did this past spring with the ed model. Right now, we also put out a safety plan to stakeholders, and we have 400 responses. I probably have 50 or 60 emails that didn't put their responses in the form. I think we have a lot of stakeholder engagement for not having face-to-face forums. When we go forward with the ed model, the next step will allow people to ask a lot of questions and share feedback. It is helpful to have those iterations. Obviously, we're also managing secondary schedules, and we're going to provide 2 options to families here as soon as we possibly can. And we're going to redo secondary school schedules at the end of July. That's unheard of. Unheard of. If we're able to get it done by the start of the year and we're able to be in the buildings, we will. So if we want to slow down the process, we can, but we want to have schedules for students if we do. And, you know, as we get more information from the ed model team after we figure out this safety plan, we'll do that. So we have quite a bit of input from community members, but please know, and I've been saying this from the start, I'm not writing the safety plan. You don't want a math teacher writing it. We're asking people who have actual expertise writing this plan, write the plan. And if someone's going to override the safety plan, they can share their expertise on it. But we're trying to bring you the best possible safety plan because, you know, not all, I have a couple kids in the schools, but the rest of them aren't mine. So I think the plan needs to be written by people who know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and I, you know, again, I really, as I said in the beginning, you know, these are just questions. They're not intended to be criticisms. You know, I think the challenge that we have in all this is depending on how you feel or how you choose to feel about the impact of the virus, you can probably find a study that supports how you feel or how you want to feel, and that makes it really challenging. Yeah, you can, Amy. That makes it really challenging. You know, when you look at the American Academy of Pediatrics, they're commenting about a 3-foot space potentially being okay for kids because of the way their studies have shown that the transmission does or doesn't happen differently within adolescents. So again, you know, you can find these things. So I'm just asking questions. Gene, you said it's obvious what will happen if we go to yellow, and that would be a trigger for pulling back from any in-person learning. Do we have a feel for what a trigger would be to be able to actually have kids back in class, whether it's 6 feet, just whatever, to have 100% of the kids back in class and have school as normal? Do we even know what that trigger might be at this point? And the answer may be no, I'm just asking.
A vaccine.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
That's where we are right now, I think,
Okay.
with that. Yeah.
Right. So the other question or comment I had, and I've had, a couple people approach me about athletics. And I know that may be I know that that's a separate, well, at least the start of outdoor athletics is a separate topic on the agenda. But I struggle. I very, very much want athletics and extracurricular and co-curricular activities to occur. What I struggle with is having them occurring, which will inherently have more social distancing challenges because of teams and things like that. I struggle with allowing them to occur, which I very, very, very much want to happen, while we're not allowing the kids to be in class every day, 5 days a week. So that's just a general, I struggle with that. I don't know what the answer is, but I struggle with that. The only other question I had related to, there was a comment, Bob, I think in your email to the community about people with special needs could request, to be in class all the time, or obviously everybody will have the option to do the virtual academy and not be in class at all. Do we have, an assessment or barometer for what those needs are that a kid might have in order to say, I need to be in the class or in the classrooms full time in order for me to have my appropriate learning experience?
I think the
Scott,
barometer would, oops, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're kind of looking at, this spring we have some students who really, we really couldn't meet their learning needs or terms of IEPs, and very, very intensive high need. And we want to be able to meet their needs, and we owe them something as well. So we're looking at making up some truly missed learning opportunities with students. And then also for students who are mainstreamed and in their individualized education plan, which is a legal contract, they have parts of that where they meet with special education teachers who happen to be their caseload managers as well. So those are just some examples of students with learning needs that are identified through our school psychologists and teams of professionals that we're looking at where we can't meet their needs. Based on those documents, we'll come up with some plans. Maybe on the off day, they would meet with their learning support teacher for some supports, or maybe some of the occupational therapists or physical therapists, speech therapists who need to see kids in person for particular unique needs. We would maybe have those happen in schools on those days if we can.
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
I would emphasize the team approach, which may include a physician also on that team. Is it safe for the child to come back? So I think that's why we emphasize that would be a team decision.
Okay, thanks.
Bob said.
Hey, Laurel, I see your hand.
Yeah, sorry, thanks. Again, thank you to all the people who have worked on this. It's really an incredible plan. I did have a couple of questions. One was just a suggestion. I noticed at the beginning where we have the list of committees, and it says whether you're doing just the whether you're doing the document or both, whether you'll be consulted during the year as well. And I was going to suggest that perhaps the CAC for school health and safety be moved from just being developing the plan to also being consulted during the year should decisions need to be made. So that's just a suggestion on that. Other things I noticed were, I forgot to mention during routine approvals, a shout out for the idea that we're purchasing tissues. Glad to hear it. That was one of the things that we did. And I think that that's important. It mentioned, we'll be talking later about a sustainability policy. And one of the things mentioned in here is the amount of disposables. And I think that's a concern a lot of people have. One idea is to specifically think about whether we can encourage students to bring their own silverware or plasticware that they could use. I know there are now more and more sets that are eco-friendly and might be an in-between between just the disposables. So that was one thought. And the last thing is a real concern actually about the plan itself. And I know this came up during our committee meeting, and that is regarding individual use of outdoor facilities during non-school hours. I understand limiting groups because of the social distancing, but I really hope that we give consideration to continuing to allowing individuals to use, be it the track or walking around, people walking their dog, whatever. I guess maybe they're not supposed to walk their dogs, but around our other outdoor facilities while we move into this phase, because those are community facilities as well as school facilities. So I hope that we'll consider that.
Jean, am I correct in that we were at this point still that we were allowing some individual use? Simply, we weren't allowing groups to reserve those.
Yep, I can let Ed speak to that.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. Sorry. Yeah, we are allowing individuals to use the track, and I don't know that that's specifically mentioned in this plan, but that was not our intent to discontinue that necessarily. The plan is, I guess, silent. I'd have to look at how it's worded exactly. Reread how it's worded in the recommendation. It says the recommendation code says outside groups. The recommendation is silent on individuals. So take a closer look at that. But certainly we didn't go in with an intent to say that we were going to step back and close things that are currently open to the public.
And we have signage up in our to say you can use at your own, knowing that we aren't sanitizing after each use. So there is signage up, right, Ed?
Yes, correct. Yes, correct, Jean.
So it doesn't say don't trespass. It just says kind of warning. Thanks, Laurel.
Gretchen?
Yeah, so I've actually had the opportunity to ask most of my questions already last Tuesday in the CAC for Safe Schools and the Facilities and Grounds Committee meetings. So, and I've just been really impressed with this plan, especially in comparison to others that I've seen, actually blown away. And so I just wanted to thank Jean and her team and thank the nurses who were incredibly knowledgeable and helpful in answering all the committee's questions in the CAC for Safe Schools and the Facilities and Grounds Committee meeting. So helpful. And as Jean said, my goodness, 45 meetings. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So just really thank you to all of the many people who have given so much of their time and energy to this plan and making our schools safe for our kids and staff to come back in the fall. I did have just a couple of questions, and actually only one question, but two comments. And the two comments I'll do first because that came from since Tuesday when we met. I was able to read the American Academy of Pediatrics document on reopening schools and their recommendations. And there were two things that stood out to me. One is that they actually recommend that public schools allow students to use the playgrounds during school in small groups. And I don't believe they specify a number, but they use the term small groups, and that they would they would disinfect their hands before they use the playground, and then they would disinfect their hands after they use the playground. And that UV light is a disinfectant on the equipment. And so they considered that to be a low risk activity. I just thought that I'd throw that out there because that was new to me since the last time that we had all these conversations. And then the second thing that I learned, and I saw in a few recommendations by different organizations, and one was the American Academy of Pediatrics, but I saw this pretty consistently, is that for secondary, they're recommending that students stay in a classroom together, and then the teachers actually are the ones that move. And so therefore the kids can be in school every day, as Scott was alluding to, and have less exposure because the teachers are the ones moving around. And so calculating out exposure per person, it's actually a lot less to do it that way. I know they do that in other countries too, because I've lived in other countries where I was in school and that's what we did. So I knew that that was something, I just hadn't thought of it until I read it in the recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And then the question, one comment to Jim Leos. He was asking about library, we like look to SCLO to see what their policies are for quarantining library materials. And actually that was in the COG report, but I didn't get into that level of detail. And what SCLO is doing is quarantining materials for 24 hours. After 24 hours, they check them in and reshelve them. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I know that that's what SCLO is doing because it's in the agenda from last Monday's COG meeting. And then my question was, if you look at page 4 of the draft, and I also wanted to emphasize it's a draft because Jean says that we should be emphasizing that this is a draft. So in the draft of the safety plan on page 4, in the second bullet point, it says the yellow phase and green phase, schools may provide in-person instruction after developing a written health and safety plan to be approved by the local governing body, school board, for example. And so because it says yellow and green, the question is, does the safety plan state explicitly that if the county goes yellow again, we go remote?
It doesn't say that explicitly, but when we talk about the yellow phase, our assumption would be that we would not be in person, the masses, but we may still be able to provide something, whether that is a robust safety plan for just a seal and a childcare, or if that's something with special education only, but not with the numbers that we have.
Okay, because that was the question, is that because I guess the governor's is not saying automatically if we go yellow, we close schools. And so what is the this is a community question, by the way, not my personal question, but what is the rationale for closing if we go yellow? Because that's not what the governor's recommending necessarily. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think the answer that would be something we would work on the community, right? If our community goes yellow, what are the safety precautions we need to take? And so our assumption from the past is that that's how we'd move forward. Although if it comes to that time and we decide our buildings and our schools are not affected enough and they're not spreading enough that maybe we can still be face-to-face, I think we would talk about that then. That's a good question though, Amber.
Okay, but that's helpful because you just clarified, I think, that if we go yellow, it's not yet determined what we would do. Whereas somehow there was an assumption out there that if we go yellow, we go to remote, but that's not determined, is what I'm understanding.
Well, we do have written in the document that schools would be closed for face-to-face instruction. In yellow. We do have that in the plan. That's probably where that's coming from.
That's where that's coming from. Okay.
Right. And so I think we would look on smaller groups and what that would look like. I don't think we can carry through our green phase the way we're suggesting, and then going into yellow and having more restrictions. I'm not sure what those more restrictions would be because we have 100% mask wearing and social distancing. So would it be more the smaller groups, and would we keep those smaller cohort groups? Maybe it's our special needs population who need that one-on-one in a smaller group under safety constraints. And so.
Okay, but it is the case then, I'm just trying to understand. So it is the case then that if the county goes yellow, for everyone, 100% of SCASD students will not be in school.
That's what we're recommending from the safety team is saying. Yep.
And because that's, I guess, different than what the second bullet point here says with the governor's recommendations, the question is what is the rationale for SCASD closing in yellow other than the special groups you're talking about?
The rationale would just be from what we've heard with yellow phase, and then keeping those groups smaller. So we would have in-person instruction for isolated groups. So we would be, for the masses closed, and we would identify those kids that could still come. We haven't worked through that. In fact, we just had this conversation, I think Friday, right, Bob? We were talking about possibly special ed continuing in the yellow phase because we're limited with what we can do because we need to provide them FAPE. And what does that look like in the yellow phase? And could we manage that in smaller numbers? So that's something I think we still need to vet through and have conversations about.
But it sounds, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm just trying to understand. So it sounds like the rationale for closing physically for the masses in yellow is because the reason that we would be designated as yellow is because of the high case numbers and
Correct.
so safety.
Correct.
So that's kind of, okay, got it.
Correct.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you. Yep.
Jean, just we have a meeting about this very issue tomorrow afternoon and how. So when we come to facility and grounds with the next iteration on this, we're going to be talking about that very issue that Gretchen raised, as well as if the state says we're green, but our physicians and local folks on our safety team are saying, hey, you have X number of cases in that small school in this amount of time. This is, and with the spread and the facts around the disease, you got to make a decision now and not wait for the governor. So we want to intersect all of this to come up with a more clear guidance, because what if we do move to yellow because of factors in the community, but what we're evidencing in the school says we're okay. So because the state said you may still be in school. So we're still, I don't think we're finished with these particular issues.
Right. And another thing just to point out is the numbers of of groups that are allowed to be together in the yellow and the green phase. And so yellow is 25. And so that's very limiting.
Yeah, and I think we have to remember that the governor will make decisions based on county, and what's happening locally within our own town could be very different, being that our town sort of doubles in size when the university students return. So we may have some very regionally specific effects, either for the better or for the worse, compared to the rest of the county. So I think we do need to have some degree of flexibility to make our own decisions versus necessarily whatever the status the governor may set up.
So many unknowns. I think the best comment I heard today, it's like nailing Jello to the wall. Okay, right? It's just so many unknowns.
Amy, did you?
I jumped in there, Amber, but is it okay if I make a couple other comments real quick? And I'll keep it brief. I know we've been on this a long time and we got a really great overview at the committee level. And as Manny said, I really appreciate the work of both our administrators and their collaboration with local experts, particularly local physicians and epidemiologists who are really experts in this field. So while one can find something in writing to try and support anything you want to say, there is some pretty solid hard science on at least some of the major issues that we're dealing with in terms of how do we keep kids and staff and teachers safe. I mean, this is about keeping our whole community safe. Certainly our children are our most precious gifts and resources to us as parents, and we want what's best for them on all fronts, but we also have to keep in mind all the different needs of that variety of students, as well as our staff and everybody else who works inside buildings, and then who those children go home to every night. So it's a pretty complex situation. And I really appreciate the dedication to science and what really needs to happen to do as much as we can to mitigate any risks. And I already shared most of my questions and feedback in committee. I will just throw out there really quickly today, I happened to notice, I know some of us have seen some of the masks with clear sections in them, but they're a little unwieldy. I saw some new research on some Kickstarters and some other things of some really high grade, fully see-through masks, which may or may not even be available by the time school comes out, but I promise that I will keep my eye on those kind of things. I know a big concern for a lot of parents of the youngest kids, especially kindergarten, is the need for that social development and facial expression and learning to read and mouth structure. And there's a lot of that. So I would just encourage all of us to keep our eyes peeled if any options like that come available. Hopefully we might be able to get some resources, at least in the teachers of the youngest children, to have some of that facial experience should we still be needing to be masked in school long term. So that's it. Thanks guys for all your super hard work.
Okay, on most of the comments and questions that were asked that I might have asked, I'm really just amazed by the amount of detail and work that's gone into this. I think when we're considering some of the downsides in terms of the safety measures that we're having to take, whether it's having students at the secondary level in every other day, or how we're going to need to be really careful with our groupings at the elementary level to keep students in those bubbles. I mean, the hope is that by taking these measures, we're able to extend the amount of time that we are in school in person, face to face. And I would be concerned that to the extent that we might avoid certain measures as being particularly onerous, there can be a downside in terms of steps that we might skip that could have kept us with lower infection numbers for longer, though that could lead to being in a remote situation sooner than we would otherwise have been. So I think it's thinking about the trade-off, not between complete normalcy as the baseline that we would hope for and expect, because that's not necessarily possible, but how these measures that we're taking are able to extend the time that we're in school face to face. So that's I think something to be clear about, I think, in our communications with families as well. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay. All right, then we'll move on to item B, which is related to this, optional outdoor summer athletic workouts. This is shown in attachment 7B.
Jean, Chris, Lauren, this was really looking at providing students access to outdoor experiences that are outlined safely and do intersect with the safety team, not in buildings. Obviously, this doesn't open up competitions for students like many of our things that are happening in our community, but we felt this made more sense to provide students with this type of optional experience that typically happens in the summer months with our athletic coaching staff, fitness center staff, in a way that is a little different than what you're seeing now when you see students in smaller groups doing some things around our campuses without any type of supervision or protocols in place. So you see the memo here from the team. Is Jean, Chris, is there anything you want to share on the front end of this?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. I want to reiterate what you guys said about Jean and her team, and I'm very thankful for all the guidance and support that they've provided through this document and all the planning we've put forth for this. And as you mentioned, Dr. Donald, that we have a great need for our student athletes to be engaged, as you know, and they're out there, they're using our facilities, and I'd like to be able to request the board's approval for this plan so that we can provide them with some guidance from our trained coaches, not only for technique and progression, but also for some of these safety protocols that have been outlined through the PDE and the CDC, as well as the district safety plan. So thank you for this opportunity.
Lori, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this. I think my comment probably also reflects a little bit on the broader safety plan, and that is that I think it's important for us to develop communication about how critical it is that students and families abide by what we're putting forth as guidelines, and that includes, if you don't feel well, don't come, and the constant sort of beating into everybody's heads that these are the symptoms, and now we know that temperature isn't necessarily the best marker. Like now they're saying it's diarrhea. So the symptoms keep changing. So I think making sure that as students come to these things, that you know, there's a lot of personal pressure that kids put on themselves. There's peer pressure to be there. So we want to make sure that students are recognizing and recognizing their symptoms and abiding by the guidelines. So I want to stress that. And the other thing I want to mention is that I have two nephews who are football players in Illinois, and they went to a kicking camp in Indiana this weekend. And prior to that kicking camp, the parents received a very similar document to this one about how spectators would have to be masked and socially distanced and all that. Well, when they arrived, none of that was happening. So I want to make sure that there are people in place who are going to really enforce these guidelines. I think it's one thing to say that these guidelines exist, but even, you know, when kids were lining up to kick, the distance between them was no longer. You know, you get into this rhythm and practice, and sometimes those things fall away because they're not habituated. So I just want to urge that there's somebody who's really working on enforcing these guidelines and making sure that everybody is masked if they're supposed to be, that they're socially distancing if they're supposed to be, etc. So those are just red flags that came up for me this weekend just from hearing about a camp that my sister's sons went to. So yeah, but thank you.
I appreciate that, Ms. Bedell, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think this plan allows us, or puts in place the mechanism for us to make sure that our coaches and our staff that are around our kids are operating on the same protocol, same consistent guidelines that have been set forth through the district, the CDC, the PDE, so that we will make sure that we are reinforcing consistent protocol and measures that are being taken. And I agree 100%. You can go to a soccer tournament down in Lancaster or wherever, and you may or may not see that. But when they're on our property, we've got to take responsibility for that. And that onus really falls upon us and our coaches to make sure that we are consistent with those and making sure they're reinforced and followed daily. And if they're not, then we've got to take action about that.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Chris, I had emailed you, or we had emailed back and forth, and I don't know whether we resolved it on item 6 of the memo, where we talk about the face coverings. Face coverings would not be required during activities or when maintaining social distancing while idle or active. But then the parenthetical expression seems to contradict the prior comment about maintaining social distancing while idle or active or inactive. So I was just bringing that up to tweak that in whatever way is necessary to have them be consistent.
Right. I appreciate your eye on that there, Mr. Fazzard, that's for sure. And when Lauren and I met with Gene this afternoon, we looked at that specifically, and we agreed 100% with what your comment said. So we talked about face coverings would be required or will be required for athletes while actively participating in activities and within 6 feet, within other 6 feet space or less for less than 10 to 15 minutes. So that they would not be required while they're actively participating in activities and they're maintaining that space cushion. But face coverings will be required while idle and or within that 6 foot of another person if that occurs. So I think, to your point, I think they need to be distinguished there, and hopefully that wording would help with that.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
That I feel like I maybe don't understand what's planned. Then, if with that tweak in the wording, is the expectation that athletes will be maintaining a 6 foot social distance during these activities or not?
Right. We're looking to maintain a 6 foot space perimeter around our athletes every opportunity we can. Now, we do recognize that there are times where there may be intermittent crossing of athletes, but again, they're not going to be sustained within 10 to 15 minute period. It's going to be quick and maybe inadvertent. But anytime that they're standing, they're around other people, they're idle, we're going to ask them to wear the mask. But all guidance that we've received from our sources say that it's not imperative that they wear a mask while actively engaged in activities. Again, any type of,
And that really emphasized, sorry, Chris.
Go ahead,
And the key there is a 10 to 15 minute window, right? The viral load is not going to be large enough unless they're maintaining within that bubble. So we're looking at the viral load, and when you're outside, that diminishes that capacity. So when you see at the kick camp, kids standing there, are they standing together closer for longer than 10 to 15 minutes? We're being told 15 minutes. Some of the research is 10. Seems that extra 5 minutes is a large window. But that will be the conversations we're having. If someone does come out positive, we will then talk about, were you in anybody's bubble for longer than 10 to 15 minutes? Were you wearing a mask? Those types of things. So it really comes down to the viral load in that timing, especially when you're outside.
Right. And I understand the point about viral load. It's just I think there's a big difference between sort of transient interactions of a minute or two up to 10 or 15 minutes. Because if students are in close contact for, 7 or 8 minutes, it's like standing close together. Like you could end up with situations where you have students in sort of clumps for, quite a few minutes, be unmasked and.
And Amber, and athletics is different in terms of the type of breathing that kids will be doing. If you're running drills, you're out of breath standing around afterwards, as opposed to just casually standing outside. And I apologize, I know I jumped in there.
And the other thing we'll be doing also for the contact tracing in those cases is we've talked a lot about cohorts. And speaking with Chris and Lauren, is on the fields or outside, we can manage cohorts, right? We can have the kickers in one area and the linemen in another, or, soccer if you have forwards. And so that's another thing taking into consider here. The outside piece aligns with our recess piece also, right? Of not wearing masks, but still maintaining social distancing. But when in active mode, really looking at that time frame and making sure that the viral load is taken into consideration in the time frame that they're together.
Jim?
Hey, Chris, I already gave you kind of a preview of this. One of my neighbors submitted a whole bunch of questions to me, and I think you did a nice job answering them, but I just want to sort of get it on the record. So according to the WHO, 80% of the COVID-19 infections present mild symptoms or are asymptomatic. Are we going to do a baseline check for our athletes of sort of COVID-19 baseline check before their first workout as a condition to participate?
We are going to do daily screening, and we're going to ask them to do daily screening prior to arriving. So they will not be able to, they're not permitted to participate unless they pass that screening that they'll do at home before they come. So, but as far as an official COVID laboratory test, that's not in our plans here, but there'll be daily screening.
And Chris, isn't it like, if we're not testing athletes every 3 days or every week, Jim, I don't know that an initial negative COVID test really is relevant, because we don't know at any point in time that they could be exposed. So some professional athletes and I don't know if some collegiate athletes are routinely testing athletes, but if we're not able to routinely test, then I don't know that there's much point in demanding a negative test when they walk in the door, because it could become irrelevant in 48 hours.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thanks. We're talking about outdoor practices, and will indoor sports such as girls volleyball hold outdoor workouts, and then will that continue into the fall, maybe weather permitting?
Well, again, this plan really focuses on the summer optional workouts. They're all outdoor. The plans for the fall haven't been really created. I think we'll be working with Gene and the other resources we have to put that in place. But the short answer for you, Mr. Leos, is that yes, girls volleyball will be participating. I'm sure they will be involved in workouts and activities and agility and drills outdoors through the remainder of the summer.
Great. Okay, thanks. And then the last one was about And I think this is true in general. This isn't just true about athletes, but we're talking about our athletes coming together and working out. But will the students be required to disclose if they go into an area that's, yellow or red, somewhere else in the country or other parts of the state in terms of travel? And then what will we do with regard to that knowledge?
Yeah. I know Gene and I and Lauren talked about that this afternoon and even a little later there. And I think what you're seeing there too, it's so fluid that those areas may change from one week to another week. And how do you respond to that? And how you monitor and stay on top of that? But Gene, I don't know if you want to speak on that behalf as well.
Yeah, I don't know if we can be explicit about, have you been to China, as we talked about at spring break, or something to that nature. And now we have, some hot spots here in Florida and things like that. We could
Philadelphia,
right? It could be Pennsylvania. We could put in there, have you traveled in any zone, any outside of here that was of higher risk? They would then need to monitor what that was. We would need to be monitoring what that is. So I'm not sure we could put it in there and see, what kind of, how we can manage that piece. We may take that a step further, while you were in this phase, did you wear your mask? Were you socially distanced? Did you wash your hands? I don't know how far we would go into that. If we just wanted an idea and then we're going to omit them if they have been. One day a kid gets back from Florida, the next day Florida shuts down, the next kid comes a day after, one kid's quarantined, the other's not, by a 2-day a day or two window, and could they both be equally contaminated? So I think we should continue that conversation to see if that's even something we can manage.
Thanks. That's all I had.
Thanks, Jim. Laurel?
Yeah, thanks. The couple of things. One is with what we were just talking about with disclosing if you've traveled. I think the other thing might be if you have a family, if you live in a family with someone who has been diagnosed, because this just talks about the individuals. But I would think if someone in your household has an active infection, that might be something that we would want people to stay home, at least for something like this that's an optional thing. And I may have missed this earlier, but it mentions a health screening on page 4.
Yeah, that I apologize. That was my editing there. That should not have been in there. This document was a little longer before.
No problem.
That's my editing here.
My reason go ahead.
No, to your point, as far as that health screen, one of those questions is as far as being close proximity to anybody in your family that might have been tested positive or not. So the language, if you had close contact with someone who was currently sick or suspended or confirmed COVID-19 within the past 14 days, that's one of those questions we'd ask.
Okay, because I went looking for the form because I was also wondering, and this pertains actually to the other one as well. Has the district purchased pulse ox monitors? Because from what I've read, that's sometimes along with temperature an early sign that people may think they're asymptomatic, but actually have reduced blood oxygen.
We have not worked with Randy on purchasing anything like that.
I tossed it into the considerations. I don't know how much they are. So that's all. Thank you.
Dan? Oh, Dan, you're still on mute. Dan, we can't hear you.
How about now?
There we go. Thank you.
Sorry. I was so enthusiastic about answering Laurel's question that I neglected to pay attention to the details. Laurel, to answer your question, a good one runs about $30 these days through Amazon. I purchased one during the early days of the early days of our experience of the pandemic anyway. Just because I understood it was really helpful to have around. And at my age, it might be something that would really come in handy. So, but now they run about 30 for a good one, for one that's pretty reliable. But it's a good question, excellent question. This is a question for Chris, and this is about outside the district more than it is inside the district, but it's about athletics. what are you hearing from PIAA in terms of their framing the question about competition or not within the pandemic? And obviously the safety issues come into play, but any other, what parameters or guidelines are you hearing, if any, from PIAA regarding competitive athletics?
Right. So far, the PIAA has been really aligning themselves with Governor Wolf and all the statements and releases that he has produced. So they're really aligning there. They're painting broad stroke guidelines and pictures that say pretty much fall in line with Governor Wolf. As far as what does competitions look like this fall, is that your question there, Mr. Duffy?
Yeah, that's essentially under what conditions, which sports, right. If I think about, being in a huddle, so to speak, in the traditional sense of football, I mean, you're not going to maintain 6 feet distance in an environment like that.
Yeah.
When you're all that's an absurd example, but the point is that some sports might be more, golf and tennis, for example, might lend themselves to competitive competition more than some other sports that involve a lot more physical contact and proximity.
No, you're right. They've identified high risk, moderate risk, and low risk sports, and then the modifications for each. To your point, for football, and again, they'll huddle, but they're not going to huddle for 10 to 15 minutes. And it's just
which they wouldn't do anyway.
If you look at our team, we don't huddle at all. So they use spatial distancing quite a bit throughout the season. So we don't huddle at all, and there's a lot of teams that don't. But I think there's modifications that are on the board with a lot of these sports to help with those type of concerns. They haven't clearly or completely been vetted and identified, defined yet, because the fall picture really hasn't been defined yet either. I keep on using an analogy with our coaches and our athletes, and we're kind of trying to piece a puzzle together of which we don't know what the picture is. So we're trying to find the common pieces. We start with the border and the common shades and different things, but we're trying to piece a puzzle together that for the fall, that is, we might not know exactly what that looks like, but we meet weekly with our Pennsylvania athletic directors, and we've been collaborating throughout the state with other schools in the state. And I'm very positive that when we get our plans together, that we'll be able to identify a safe plan for our student athletes. Because I think, as you know, this experience of extracurriculars, whether it be marching band, theater, drama, athletics, is so valuable to the full experience of our students and to the pursuit of greater things beyond high school. And for many of them, that's their avenue to get to college, to be able to participate at a college level in whatever that talent might be that they have.
Yeah, that has been on my mind. A lot of these young people have a lot invested in some kind of performance, either athletic performance, musical performance, theater, and that's their pathway towards higher ed or some experience after high school. And this really puts a damper on those opportunities, or could. So the question gets to be, how do we give as many opportunities as possible without putting everybody at risk? I mean,
what key elements of those experiences can we preserve in some form that gives them that avenue, maintains that avenue for them to pursue whatever that might be, and whatever skill they have, as you said, band, theater, drama, whatever it might be. And I'm confident we'll come up with that plan.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You.
We'll also bring this through F&G before we return to your next meeting.
All right, other questions on this item? Okay. All right, so the elementary playground update in attachment 7C is next.
Thanks, Amber. Continue to have good news to report on the elementary school playgrounds. Work on Spring Creek is nearly complete. I believe that the contractor, as well as the contractor, believes they will be finished at Spring Creek prior to the end of this week. and beginning Coral Street at some point, either late this week or very early next week. When they are working a single crew and working working systematically through the project. So after they finish Coral Street, they will move on to Radio Park. They believe that Radio Park will be completed by their contracted completion date of August 7. And the pictures that are being shown were taken last week. There is even more progress since these pictures have been shown, and they are very close to completion. Haven't been any change orders or no additional costs on the budget. So all in all, I think we have a good report on playgrounds, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Okay. Ed, so essentially they're doing one playground at a time, and the intent is to have them all done by the beginning of school.
Correct.
Right? Okay. So I'd heard some questions about how do they decide which playground to do first and who goes last, but in essence, it's not a material question if they're all supposed to be done before school starts anyway.
That's correct. And they have one crew, and since it was, it's all similar type work. There was some pictures there about, I don't know if you could tell, the one set of pictures showed them putting together the log scramble. And this log scramble is not, a pre-manufactured piece of equipment. It's actually getting logs out of trees and debarking them and arranging them and bolting them. And, they didn't want to have 3 crews of people trying to figure out a log scramble, simultaneously. So they feel like, they got their log scramble strategy together at Spring Creek, and, moving on to the next project, they'll have a little bit better idea of the process and be a little bit more efficient. So, and, there was no, we certainly didn't petition them on what order to do. They just picked an order, and that's the order they picked. And they'll all be done, prior to the start of school.
And that makes so much sense about having the crew, who've gotten experience with one playground and moving forward. So
yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, Laurel.
Yeah, thanks. 2 questions. One is, how about the time for grass to grow? Is the substantial completion the actual installation of features, or how does that play into when kids can actually run and hang out on the playground?
Yeah, the actual the August 7th we're thinking is the actual completion of work, and not the complete fill-in of the grass. We'll have to monitor that as we get closer to school and see if I don't want to predict that particular item, and if we need to look at some ways to get, a lot of the equipment doesn't necessarily involve, the sliding board's the big one that's grass dependent. So either the sliding board might, and there are some wooden steps up to the sliding board. So we'll work through, what that looks like as we get closer to the opening of school.
Okay. The other thing is, especially at Coral Street, as the equipment is taken down, I'll forward to you. If I didn't before, I'll go check again. But there have been some districts that have looked into ways to reuse that equipment, say donating it to other opportunities. And I know you said that there's some specific requirements from the state, but if it is possible to allow that to be used further, that would be a good thing, I think. And I'll forward you the examples I had seen of how that was done, and just ask that the equipment be taken down carefully. So if it's possible to reuse, it can be.
Well, I'll take a look at that. As you mentioned, there are parameters around how surplus equipment is disposed of, and certainly don't want to add cost to the project at this point. But we'll look at the issue and see what's being removed and if there's any opportunities there.
Thanks.
Thank you. We better move on then, since we still have two more items. Well, oh goodness. No, we have more than two more items. So the next item on the agenda is the 2020 bond refunding update, attachment 7D. If Randy Brown could give us an update on this.
Sure, this is just a real brief update. When we talked about this at the last meeting, I told you that you would have a parameters resolution to pass, and I believe I mentioned that it might be tonight. I spoke a little prematurely. What I've provided for you is an updated calendar. We're working with our financial advisor and getting ready for our bond rating agency call, and getting our preliminary offering statement developed and circulated amongst our team. We will have our rating agency call, or our due diligence call, excuse me, the week of July 20th. And on the 20th, we'll ask you to prepare or to approve your parameters resolution at that time. And then we're looking at a selling of the bonds, or a pricing of the bonds, the week of August 10th. So that's all that I wanted to, because I had spoken inadvertently at the last meeting. I just wanted to let you know what to expect and when. And if there's any other questions, obviously we'll continue to work with our financial advisor, our municipal advisor, and study the market to make sure that the savings potential that we discussed is still available for us, but we have not been advised that that is not the case. Anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on then to policy. This is attachment 7E, and we have 3 different items, and I'll turn it over to Linda Pierce to lead this discussion.
Here we go. Good evening. All right, the first one, relatively easy. We're talking about policy 002, authority and powers. This is a policy that PSBA has reviewed as part of our contract with them to review our policies. Excuse me. Their recommendations are in bold. And actually, Scott Etter, if you could please talk about the first sentence in the powers section.
The existing language we had was for ages 5 to 21, which would be the ages when students could attend schools in our district. The change that PSBA policy folks are talking about with the move to 6 is a change for the upcoming school year, where the compulsory attendance ages will be adjusted. Because of the way it's worded with the word required for the education, I think rather than compulsory education limitations or ranges, the available ranges would be more appropriate. So I think Linda and I both think that keeping it as 5 and 21 is more appropriate than changing it to 6 and 21, which is the case with the PSBA recommendation.
6, well, yeah, that's their recommendation. The actual law change is 6 and 18.
Yes, yes. And 21, for those of you who might be wondering why that would be, a special education student during the year that they turn 21 can continue, or up through the year that they turn 21, can continue in the educational program.
So we would have the wording at 5 and 21 then.
That's our recommendation.
Okay. Any board questions or discussion on this policy? Okay.
Does the board have a preference on whether to use 5 or 6?
I think 5.
That makes sense. Mhm.
5.
5.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the recommendation.
Sounds good.
Laurel, you had a question?
Really just a comment that I like this additional paragraph, because if you look at it, really the first paragraph talks about our fiduciary things primarily. And I like that this second paragraph really goes to the heart of the matter, which is the education we provide. So just I guess a shout out to PSBA for having added that paragraph. I think it's a good one.
Yep. Okay, so policy 10, employment of friends and family members.
So this is our, well, employment of friends and family members is a nice way of saying nepotism. It was last year when the state audited our practices. Not only did they audit our financial record keeping, but they audited our practices. They asked if we had a nepotism policy, and the answer was no. So we've worked on putting this together. So this is a brand new policy for SCASD, and is being recommended for full board consideration by the Policy Development Committee. We tried to strike a balance between not having any policy at all, but also not completely eliminating the possibility that there might be a chance when employing 2 individuals, one of whom is in a supervisory relationship, the expertise of those 2 individuals outweighed the concerns of one being a supervisor or the other. We just have to figure out a way to make some adjustments in that situation.
Okay. Questions? And this policy has been reviewed numerous times now by the policy committee.
Correct.
And thanks to Linda for all the great work on the languaging of it.
Okay, so then moving on to policy 717, sustainability.
Gretchen, not Gretchen, I'm sorry, Lori, this is your policy.
Yeah, so the district decided that it would be a good idea, or the policy committee, the board, that it would be a good idea for us to have a sustainability policy. So after reviewing policies that exist in other districts, we decided to pull a lot of language and craft our own version of it. And so what you see before you is kind of an amalgamation of those things. We tried to keep it as high level as we possibly could, while still paying attention to areas of facilities and education, as you've all seen. So yeah, it has also been through the policy committee for several iterations and revisiting, and students looked at it. So this is kind of where we are now.
So I took a stab at giving it a number. Because the sustainability is not a policy that PSBA recommends. And I checked with PSBA to say, this is where I think it belongs. I got a response this morning, and they're recommending that we actually put it in the 800 section and make it 833. So that truly is the board's discretion, whether we keep it in 700s or move it to 800, but just wanted to let you know.
All right, questions or comments on this draft? Scott?
Yeah, the only comment I had was adding something associated with the economic balance of sustainability goals and activities.
I did think that was in there.
I didn't see it. If I missed it.
To support sustainability as an economic, environmental, and social priority.
Or are you saying in terms of a cost benefit?
Yes, well, I really don't mean as much cost benefit, just recognizing that there are certain sustainability things that we might want to do that aren't economically feasible. Not that there necessarily has to be a cost benefit from a dollars and cents standpoint, because some of it's educational, and it's hard to quantify the cost benefit on something like that.
Yeah, I think we tried to do that in a couple of spots. In number 5,
okay.
Optimize, I'm sorry. Yeah, procure materials, products, and services in a manner that integrates fiscal responsibility and community environmental stewardship. And then number 9 also talks about financial investments in the interest of long-term sustainability. So maybe that's not getting exactly at what you're talking about, Scott, but
you know what? Good point. I read 9 a little bit differently, and I missed the fiscal responsibility portion. So yeah, let me think about that. I think those are pretty fine. When you point those out, those are pretty fine from the standpoint of what I was looking for.
okay. Well, if you look at them again and want to get back to me, we can always pull it back into committee. There's no huge rush.
Okay. No, I'll let you know. Thanks.
Okay.
Gretchen?
Yeah, I just had a question, I guess, well, other people probably already know this, but I'd have to go look it up. So Linda, what are the 700s and what are the 800s in terms of topics?
700s is property and 800s are operations. Yeah, I kind of think it's a toss-up myself. Okay, so in that discussion, is that something we want to, all sort of say our 2 cents, or are we going to bring that back to committee, or?
I think 800s might make more sense. If people are looking for a policy like this, they'd probably go to district operations, right?
I would think so too, because it's sort of beyond just the facilities. There's a wider breadth of categories that this seems to try to address.
Yeah, I would agree with what Lori just said. And it's interesting, I actually just had a conversation about this with Peter Buck the other day. And what we were talking about is that it's sort of analogous to equity work, and that it really is a part of everything. If you really want to do sustainability well, then, anybody who's taken a look at the other plans and policies of other districts, you've seen this, where it's really in absolutely everything that a school district does, or it has the potential to be. So I guess because of that, I think that property would not be the right place, because that's only talking about property. And like Lori just said, operations is more, it's broader.
Any other comments, Jim?
Yeah, just the one that I think, backing up what Lori says, it also speaks to procurement, which I think is operations. So I definitely think it belongs probably in an operations section.
Good point. Okay. Anything else on sustainability? So we will most likely bring these 3 policies back to the board in another month, right?
Or we could do it on July 20th, whichever.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, thank you so much. So our last information discussion item of the evening, and I apologize how late it is and how long everyone's had to stay tuned here. Item F is the social studies curriculum proposal. This is shown in attachment 7F. And I'll turn this over to Vern and Will for this item, I think.
Are Deirdre and Chris, are you going to kick this off, or is, I think?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We're very excited to get started revising and writing our social studies units. And our first step, as you know, in every curricular area we've brought to you is a scope and sequence. And that's what we're bringing to you today to present and discuss. We heard from students today, 2 students at the beginning of this meeting. I think it was just 2, but you know, they're very passionate about change. So are we. We're really excited to really take on more anti-bias and anti-racial education and revise the whole scope and sequence that makes more sense for kids. Given the events in the nation and the world, we recognize the critical need for anti-bias and anti-racial instruction in the social sciences. We've incorporated standards from all different areas that help us with that work. And we started to look at PA standards because that's our state and we're required to teach the PA standards. But we went bigger than that, and we looked at the National Council for Social Studies, their C3 standards, which were written more recently. And we really felt they had a more comprehensive and intriguing approach because they're all based within an inquiry approach, an inquiry arc for teaching social studies. And that's more student questioning and driven by student interest. And we really, really love that approach. We also are taking a focus on how to have more difficult conversations about history, not just presenting one perspective of history. We're passionate about including the teaching tolerance standards as well. And as you see in the document, we've selected teaching tolerance standards for every grade level, and they are designed to help us specifically focus on anti-bias education. And they include a focus on identity, diversity, justice, and action. We hope to get approval to continue to develop units and find good resources that support this important content area. And we just are, again, really focused on a better scope and sequence for our students to eliminate gaps and redundancies and create a really good plan that makes sense and really helps our students be prepared for the world that they're entering when they graduate. I'd also like to thank Jackie Saylor, the coordinator for social studies, who's on this call. I know she's worked hard, and as well as Deirdre Bauer, my counterpart. I've really enjoyed working with them, and we're all very passionate and excited to get this work off the ground.
All right, so I'll open it up to questions. Lori, I see your hand.
I'm sorry I'm talking so much tonight, everybody. First of all, thank you. I agree that this is exciting. Having spoken with a number of young people in recent weeks, I know how important this is to them. And something that is tangible in this document, but if I could, I'd like to just really emphasize is building a foundation where we understand the definitions of some of the ideas that we're teaching. So having an really approaching this through a critical cultural lens, I think is going to be super important. So, you know, when we talk about things like culture or fairness or what it means to be civically engaged, being able to give kids the tools to critically assess those things as being status quo, but not necessarily something that should be accepted as a norm. I think giving kids those tools to really critically identify those things is going to be crucial. So, you know, even at very young ages, you know, what does it mean to be a citizen, or you know, the economic bits of it? You know, what does it mean for somebody to earn money? Well, who has access to those opportunities for money? I think that it gets really complicated. So being able to teach those things out from a young age so that kids aren't taught to think that what they see is what they should always expect, but instead that they can really critically think through those things and understand that there are degrees of privilege and lack of equity that set people up for struggle. So anyway, I see that those pieces are sort of in there, but there's some assumptions made in some of the language at this early stage that I would love to see sort of rectified. But other than that, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Laurel?
Thanks. So we talked about these in the curriculum committee and or culture, climate, and learning committee. and I do like a lot of what I see. I still would like to see some type of parallel document that did, or a couple of them. One that helped maybe through examples show people when kids might learn about particular topics, you know, be it ancient Rome to one that's been in the news recently, the Tulsa massacre, basically. So that, because these standards, while they talk about broad concepts, a lot of people still look at social studies and want to make sure that by the end of 12 years, kids know certain fundamental shared historical facts. So that would be one. And the other would be some type of grid that showed us how the pieces fit together, including the high school piece and how the sequence might be in high school. So that's a request. Another one is some short summary of the research that, not the research which you have summarized in here and you talked about that led to these, but also where the concerns were, what the research phase of our existing curriculum showed in terms of why it needed the degree of change, because this is such a big change. I think that would be helpful for people to understand, especially people who maybe, like me, when my child was in elementary school many years ago, it seemed okay to me. I might have a different lens now, but I think that would be helpful for people to understand. And the last thing was that I had a question, and that is regarding the I can statements. They just seem to me, those are described as outcomes in the teaching tolerance materials, and we don't have other outcomes listed throughout here. So I think often they're outcomes of the standards. It just looked to me odd to have them in here as a standalone. I was wondering what the thinking behind that was.
The teaching tolerance standards, you mean?
Well, not the standards, because the standards I understand, but what they in their document call the outcomes. So the I can statements are listed as outcomes, grade level outcomes, as opposed to standards. And that's why I was curious about them in this document.
That's just what they call them. They don't have standards. They have anchor areas in the teaching tolerance standards, Laurel. But when the teachers really dug into it, they felt that I can statements provide greater level of specificity. So that's what we went with.
Well, it says, and the thing I'm looking at, it says anchor standards and domains.
Correct.
I know several of them are in here. I think it's odd to have outcomes in one area and not in others, though I think it's fine to have as a companion document. That's actually kind of what I've been looking for, is both having the broad standards, but also having a way that people understand what we see as an end, what we hope the end point is from kids studying these things. But I appreciate the explanation.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah, just quickly, I appreciate the fact that civics looks like it's addressed at every level in the scope and sequence. I think that's terrific. And I am very intrigued to see what human geography will be like at 9th grade. I think that was a great suggestion.
We're very excited about that change.
I teach social studies and I want to take AP Human Geography and Human Geography. It's a fantastic class.
Okay, other questions? David?
Sorry, I can't seem to get my hand up in the screen here. I don't know what my
That's okay.
So without going into a lot of taking time, I just want to echo Lori's comments and Jim's. This is really exciting stuff, and I'm just so impressed with the enthusiasm with which you're bringing this forward. The idea of really integrating civics is wonderful. And this may seem to be not the headline of this, but I am personally really enthusiastic about the fact that you're including geography on a regular basis. This is a natural tie-in with mathematics, and especially at the younger grades, understanding geography on a local level, I think is something that will be really useful for our kids. So all the way around, I'm really impressed. Thanks.
Amy?
Sorry. my hands are sweaty and I'm not getting the button hit. So yeah, we had a great discussion in committee, and I think this is really, really exciting. I guess, there's always a lot of back and forth about scope and sequence and what that means, and the ability for the community to interpret and being able to walk away with understanding about what we're, for lack of a better word, serving up. That's not a good phrase, but what we're providing kids. Sorry, I'm hungry and tired. And, I think Deirdre made a really good analogy for us way back when we first started looking at these curriculums, that the scope and sequence is kind of the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more below the surface that goes into what gets taught. However, beings that we're making, every curriculum change we've made has been pretty substantive, but this one in particular, I think is, there's a lot of ways to teach reading, but we're still teaching reading, and math. We can approach it in different ways, but we're still teaching math. And in many ways, this is a whole new approach to how our district has taught this subject in the past. And we're also, thank goodness, bringing in a lot more actual content into it that we haven't had before. And so I think we're in a delicate spot a little bit about, trying to help translate EduSpeak for community members to really understand what's happening in classrooms. And I know it's really tricky, like the whole chicken and the egg kind of thing. When units are written, then it's a lot more easy to explain those things versus, but you have to have the scope and sequence first. And it's this, and I know we also talk about curriculum being this iterative process as well, but this is such a fundamental shift in a lot of ways for our community and our district. I do think it's really important that we kind of articulate a central framework about how we're approaching social studies and civics. And while I don't doubt that that's within the plan that you guys have all crafted, I don't know if we've articulated it well enough to be accessible to a lot of people necessarily. And that's not something that is necessarily going to hold us back from getting started in implementation and writing units, but I do think it might be something we really have to consider maybe important. Some of the standards when we say, especially I think elementary school in particular is a little bit nebulous to try and wrap your head around. Like when we say we're going to teach cultural, whatever. A lot of people want to know what that really is like and what it's going to be. And from all sides of the directions, it's about fidelity of having what you expect taught, and kids walking away with a certain amount of knowledge. So, I don't know if there's a way for us to maybe say, when kids leave elementary school, we expect them to be able to handle these like 10 big topics or 10 big ideas or 10, and maybe we say after middle school, okay, now kids are going to have build on that and say, they're going to be able to understand interactions between geopolitical units, or I'm not sure, but I do think, as we start to roll out some of these curriculums, it's a lot easier for parents to understand, okay, the approach to math is different, or okay, reading workshop is a different way to teach critique of literature or writings, but this is kind of a little just different. And so I want to make sure that what we're putting out really has a solid foundation. And I think too, we have an opportunity to be a model in the state for this, because, we're doing a lot of groundbreaking work, and you always want to put your best foot forward the first time. But I think in this particular case, it's really imperative on us to make sure that, we're really explicit about what we want to do. And I'm not saying we're not really close to that. I think we really are. I just don't know if it's accessible for all people if they're not involved in social studies or education. So it's just a thought and an observation.
Yeah, I would ditto a lot of what Amy said there. I think when I going through from elementary to middle to high school, it's clear the approach is very different at each level. And part of that is, I'm sure, because of the different amounts of time and structure in which we're teaching social studies at each of those levels. But it did sort of seem to me, I was reading through it, that it might help to have perhaps some explicit statements or frameworks that are provided in the scope and sequence that explain a little bit about the approach. Here's what the elementary curriculum approach is methodologically, pedagogically. And that seems like that's maybe a little bit different as you go from elementary to middle to high school. And I know you could look at scope and sequence documents for other curriculum that we've approved and say the same thing, but it did seem a little more notable in the social studies curriculum how the standards seem to be articulated in a different way at each level. And part of that maybe is course selection at the high school drives how those courses are written, so they're very specific to those courses. And in elementary school, we simply get less time. But I did think there might be a place to provide sort of some framework statements around each of those levels to improve understanding of what the goals are.
So I'm not quite sure what you're asking for with framework statements, because we are using the National Council for Social Studies framework that we pulled out.
Right.
We provided that. And the C3 standards are civics, economics, geography, and history. Those are the 4 strands that run throughout. So you want something in addition to that.
So looking through those documents, it was really clear, the National Council document, that it's intended to be an inquiry-based approach. I'm not sure that comes across as clearly in the scope and sequence document if people are not also referencing the national document. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, Amber, because the scope and sequence document is the what. The framework we added, which we've never added to any other curricular area that we brought before you before, is the how. So again, the curriculum is the what. The instructional framework is the inquiry arc, and that is the additional piece of information that we added that talks about the themes and really calls out the 4 aspects of the inquiry arc. So that's the how, which is different than the what. So I hear you asking for an instructional framework, and so I feel like we've added that piece to kind of highlight what that would look like. Does that make sense? So curriculum with standards is the what. Then we've not really brought instructional frameworks before the board before, so we added that to try to clarify what that could look like as far as implementation. I don't know if that helps clarify things, Amber.
It does help. And then the only other comment that I have is in regard to, there's been clearly a national discourse around social studies education, and we've heard from students about ensuring that more diverse experiences are represented. And it's very clear to me that that's your intention throughout this curriculum. And to the extent that we can be as explicit as possible, that is the intention as we're looking through the scope and sequence. I don't know if there's any wording or tweaks that can make, as we're translating this document for community members who are certainly going to be looking for some of those aspects specifically, to, ways that we can make that as clear as possible. So
we added a little bit of that, Amber, in the framework document. So the standards are the standards, we can't change them. So if there's a word missing or it's not highlighted in the state standards or the C3 framework, we can't adjust the standards. But we did add, because of the sensitivity and our desires in our school district to have and teach about anti-racism. So we added that piece as well as the social justice standards.
Right.
As a part of the framework piece.
Okay.
I agree, like that should be, we want to highlight that. I agree with you 100%.
Okay. Because I guess, for me reading through it, it's a little hard for me to understand how each of those pieces fits together. So maybe that's simply, whether it's as we communicate going forward, maybe that's where, to understand how those different documents fit together. I saw Dan had his hand up.
Yeah, there was some thoughts. I mean, between everyone's comments up to this point, it kind of covered a lot of territory. The only thing I would say is that in reviewing it through CCL, I looked at the C3 standards as kind of a conceptual underpinning for the curriculum redesign. They were the broad theoretical conceptual bases for what we were trying to accomplish. And the principles of the C3 showed up in the headings, particularly grade 1 through grade 5. And what I liked about the reference to those standards, the C3 standards, is that they always wound up in that the goal or the intent or the process of applying those standards would lead to a step that was described as taking informed action. So following inquiry or interest and study about a particular topic and identifying primary sources and doing an analysis of and study on that question, ultimately it would lead to some decision on the part of the individual or a group to act on it. And one of the things, and that showed up in each of the elementary grades as kind of a guiding principle, but it didn't wind up as an operational set of activities that were built into those standards at those grade levels. The idea of taking informed action. So we talked about this some in the committee. If we're educating kids to be able to implement and to follow these, engage in these activities that are reflected in these principles, what does it mean for one or several students to work together in identifying a critical area worthy of study and inquiry? What does it mean to identify and seek out the primary sources and information that might help solve or address that problem or answer those questions? But primarily then, how does that lead? What does it look like for, even at that age, even as an elementary student, what does it look like for the group of kids to take informed action in trying to resolve or address that need or problem within the community of the classroom? I think it's the operational side of it. And this is not, one of the things that occurred to me after our discussion in the committee was that there are elements of the social emotional learning curriculum that really overlap with the social skills required for implementing a social studies curriculum. And by that I mean, you really want to be able to work with kids in terms of taking a perspective outside of their own, being effective at listening, being effective at problem solving, and finding a middle ground. There are things like that we are so wanting in our discourse within the country right now, that it seems to me would involve implementing the civic virtues or civic ideals, as they're called. I guess as I was reading it, there are references to content study, which is good. They're not bad. Geography, among others, I think would be an area that would be among the various areas that are studied. Those all are going to involve some kind of content learning, but there's some processes too that I think a curriculum, a social studies curriculum, can be an opportunity to help develop in our students. That was my reaction to it. I'm not sure if that relates well to what you were saying, Amy, or what you had to say, Amber, but that was my take on it. It's like, how can we operationalize this and teach specific skills and model that the teacher modeling these things out loud, and similar to the way in which the social emotional learning skills are taught. That's about it.
That's exactly right, Dan. When we looked at these at elementary, we see a nice integration with second step. So I've worked with the counselor at Mount Nittany to how do we connect the social emotional second step standards with the social studies standards, and as we work through those particular things in the classrooms. I agree with you, Dan.
Good. Thank you, Deirdre.
Other questions? I had one more thought looking through the secondary course offerings, which are numerous and really fantastic that we're providing that many electives to secondary students. But wondering, as we go look at the 12th grade, what's available to students for 12th grade, they can do AP Government, they can do AP European History. It doesn't seem like right now we have built in advanced course offerings that are targeted at 12th grade students that are representing non-Western civilization or those more global perspectives. And so obviously I've been on the board as we voted for most of these courses that have come along, and I've been really glad to support adding some of the more diverse course offerings that we have. But I do worry a little bit, and to some extent it's because we have this system of the 5.0 versus the 4.0 in the GPA, and how that creates sometimes perverse incentives for students. But to potentially, as we're going forward, to be thinking about, ensuring that students who want to take coursework that represents more diversity in terms of human experiences at that level also have an opportunity to get advanced class credit for it. I think there could be various ways to look at that, but just something to think about going forward. Not necessarily for the scope and sequence right now. But.
Amber?
Yes.
I think there might be some public comment about this.
Mm-hmm. I was definitely gonna make sure that we were able to call on, if there's no more board member conversation here at this time. Okay. Okay, because since we typically don't have a public comment session at the end, but since we're in the Zoom format, we're not really able to chat with each other after the meeting. I do want to call on, I see Cynthia Young, Dr. Young has her hand raised. And if you would like to ask any questions or comments.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. For those of you who don't know, I'm the Department Head of African American Studies at Penn State. And I was at the earlier meeting where the social studies curriculum was rolled out to parents and had some questions there. So I've been thinking a lot about the questions that have been raised. And I guess what I want to ask for is perhaps a pause in approving the social studies curriculum. And that's not because I don't think that the people who put this together have worked incredibly hard, because it's clear they have. And it's also not because I don't think it represents a significant change from the previous curriculum. It is because I think there are a few key questions that haven't been sort of satisfactorily answered to my mind. So to say what those are, in the discussion that we were having earlier, or you all were having earlier, where Amy talked about a kind of central framework, what I understood her to be saying, or at least where I thought what she had to say dovetailed with what I was thinking, is that I understand you have the what, and I understand you have the how, but what I don't see here is the why. In other words, what is the kind of principle or set of principles that motivates this kind of change in curriculum? And I do think that that would go a long way toward helping parents understand why the shift the district is making is being made, like what that's about and what that's for. And I'll kind of give you one example. So in reading over the materials we were given at that earlier meeting, there's a section where you talk about kind of global, what does it mean to live in a globally connected world, or something like that? I'm paraphrasing.
Globally dependent, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. What I found a little bit sort of revealing, I guess, about that is that we've always lived in a globally interconnected community. At least the US has always lived in a globally interconnected community, in as much as you can't talk about the triangular trade and slavery without talking about the kind of interconnection between the new world and the old world in Africa, right? So that's just kind of one example of, if you have a particular sort of starting point, then the kind of nod towards an anti-racist curriculum or a shift towards an anti-racist curriculum looks more additive than kind of transformative in terms of the whole framework. But that's just one example. I guess a few things that I would sort of note or ask everyone to sort of think about is we heard from the students earlier about their desire to see kind of more, one person talked about geography being more of a kind of central focus, by which I took him to be talking about the sort of understanding of how the US interconnects or interacts with the rest of the world. And then someone else talked about LGBTQ and just more kind of inclusive curriculum more generally. And I wanted to hear more about what their survey results were. So I hope you all will be able to find that out, and maybe the public will as well. But what that pointed out to me is when we spent a lot of time, you all spent a lot of time talking about the COVID-19 preparation. And one of the things that Bob O'Donnell said is that the plan was developed based on experts, right? It was developed based on the expertise, the best kind of health expertise that we have right now. It wasn't developed with just like parents' input, because we're not experts. And one of the things that I think is evident to me in this, just knowing the process as I do a little bit, is that I don't think that the Social Studies Curriculum Committee relied enough upon the local experts that we have in these areas. I think there's often a tendency just to look to the ed school, and I know there was some participation with folks from the ed school, but when I think about people who could have gotten involved in the history and the economics and the civics sections, where are the people from African American studies? Where are the people from Latino studies? Where are the people from history? Where are the people from women's gender and sexuality studies? So it just seems to me that this is an opportunity to collaborate with experts on these matters, as opposed to kind of having an additive curriculum around teaching tolerance. Teaching tolerance is great, that's fine. But it seems to me that you need to have a kind of transformative vision of how thinking globally and thinking in a way that is more inclusionary across a series of things would mean that your entire curriculum would reflect that, as opposed to a sort of separate kind of diversity curriculum. And I think that's a mistake that people often make. I know that Saria was involved in discussions around the curriculum. So I'm not saying that people weren't attentive to it. I'm just saying that there are experts in the community who could have been tasked with helping people think through things. Just to give you one example, we won a Mellon Foundation grant a few years ago, and we did a collaboration with the high school where we were able to bring a film about the Atlantic slave trade, and we brought the filmmakers to, they did screenings, and then they were in the high school, and they talked with all of the 11th graders in kind of smaller groups and units. That's the kind of thing that the school district could really leverage the kinds of experts that we have to really transform the curriculum, so that it's not just like an additive thing on top of what's already going on, but it's actually transforming the entire kind of why we're doing what we're doing. And I think that kind of filters down in terms of people saying, well, if we're going to talk about the history of the US, for example, what's the place of settler colonialism in that? What's the place of the transatlantic slave trade in that, et cetera? So I'm just trying to give you a few examples to just sort of say, I think we have an opportunity to really consider people who are experts in these fields and collaborate in a way that hasn't been possible perhaps in the past, or hasn't been thought of in the past, but maybe now should be. Thank you.
You're muted, Amber.
Sorry. I'll say that all again. Thank you so much, Dr. Young, for your perspective, and also for hanging in with us for so long this evening, to be able to listen to the conversation. So I'm sure we'll be in touch. All right. Any other questions or comments on this item?
I just want to thank everybody that was involved. You know, our plan was to take a big step forward for 21-22. You know, we're in the middle of an international or worldwide pandemic, and for them to step up and say, hey, we want to make some changes in at least 20-year-old curriculum, especially in K-5. You know, in any curriculum change that we have made, and including all of our certified social studies teachers, looking at standards that are developed with a lot of people beyond our school district for K-12 and all the offerings we have. I don't think we want to stop moving forward and let perfect get in the way of much better. And I think when you look at the development of courses and units, the opportunity to collaborate with people if they have expertise and are willing to sit down and have conversations. I can tell you that I was just talking to someone today at the Huck Institute who wants to meet with biology classes. And we're obviously going to engage her in that. And it might change what we're doing in biology moving forward with what she's bringing to the table. So I think there are many opportunities to collaborate. And I just appreciate everybody trying to take a big step forward, because this has been a long time coming and it wasn't supposed to happen this summer at all. So I appreciate everybody for their work on this.
All right. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. At this point, I'm going to propose that we punt the board committee reports until the next board meeting, if there's no objections to doing so. I don't see any objections. Okay. Then that takes us to future agenda planning. You can see we have a meeting next week. And at this time, I would like a motion to adjourn to executive session.
Amber, I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and do that exec session next week.
Great. Good plan. So just a motion to adjourn then.
Laurel, so moved.
Second, Duffy.
All right. All in favor of adjourning? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we are adjourned.